Chapter 46 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 46. The Flood in the Magra. When it rains in Italy, it does so with a passionate ardor that bespeaks an unusual pleasure. It is no soft dissolving in tears, but a perfect outburst of woe, wailing in accents the very wildest, and deluging the land in torrents. Mountain streams that were rivulets in the morning before noon arrives are great rivers, swollen and turbid, carrying away massive rocks from their foundations, and tearing up large trees by the roots. The dried up stony bed you have crossed a couple of hours back with unwetted feet is now the course of a stream that would defy the boldest. These sudden changes are remarkably frequent along that beautiful tract between Nice and Massa, and which is known as the Riviera de Levant. The rivers, fed from innumerable streams that pour down from the Apennines, are almost instantaneously swollen, and as their bed continually slopes towards the sea, the course of the waters is one of headlong velocity. Of these, the most dangerous by far is the Magra. The river, which even in dry seasons is a considerable stream, becomes, when fed by its tributaries, a very formidable body of water, stretching full a mile in width, and occasionally spreading a vast sheet of foam close to the very outskirts of Sarzana. The passage of the river is all the more dangerous at these periods as it approaches the sea, and more than one instance is recorded where the stout raft devoted to the use of travelers has been carried away to the ocean. Where the great post road from Genoa to the south passes, a miserable shieling stands, half hidden in tall osiers, and surrounded with a hedgy, swampy soil. The foot sinks in at every step. This is the shelter of the boatmen who navigate the raft, and who, in relays by day and night, are in waiting for the service of travelers. In the dreary days of winter, or in the drearier nights, it is scarcely possible to imagine a more hopeless spot. Deep in the midst of a low marshy tract, the especial home of tertian fever, with the wild stream roaring at the very door-sill, and the thunder of the angry ocean near, it is indeed all that one can picture of desolation and wretchedness. Nor do the living features of the scene relieve its gloomy influence. Though strong men, and many of them in the prime of life, premature age and decay seem to have settled down upon them. Their lustreless eyes and leaden lips tell of ague, and their sad, thoughtful faces bespeak those who are often called upon to meet peril, and who are destined to lives of emergency and hazard. It was in the low and miserable hut we speak of, just as night set in of a raw November, that 4 of these raftsmen sat at their smoky fire, in company with 2 travelers on foot, whose humble means compelled them to await the arrival of someone rich enough to hire the raft. Meanly clad and wayworn were the strangers who now sat endeavoring to dry their dripping clothes at the blaze, and conversing in a low tone together. If the elder, dressed in a russet-colored blouse and a broad-leafed hat, his face almost hid in beard and mustaches, seemed by his short and almost grotesque figure a travelling showman, the appearance of the younger, despite all the poverty of his dress, implied a very different class. He was tall and well knit, with a loose activity in all his gestures which almost invariably characterizes the Englishman, and though his dark hair and his bronzed cheek gave him something of a foreign look, there was a calm, cold self-possession in his air that denoted the Anglo-Saxon. He sat smoking his cigar, his head resting on one hand, and evidently listening with attention to the words of his companion. The conversation that passed will save us the trouble of introducing them to our reader, if he have not already guessed them. "If we don't wait," said the elder, "till somebody richer and better off than ourselves comes, we'll have to pay 7 francs for passin' in such a night as this." "It is a downright robbery to ask so much," cried the other angrily. "What so great danger is there, or what so great hardship, after all?" "There is both one and the other, I believe," replied he, in a tone evidently meant to moderate his passion. "And just look at the poor craytures that has to do it. They're as wake as a bit of wet paper. They haven't the strength to make themselves heard when they talk out there beside the river." "The fellow yonder," said the youth, "has got good brawny arms, and sinewy legs of his own." "Ay, and he's starved after all. A cut of rye bread and an onion won't keep the heart up, nor a jug of red vinegar, though you call it grape juice. On my conscience, I'm thinking that the only people that preserve their strength upon nothing is the Irish. I used to carry the bags over the Slieve na Brogan mountain and the Turk's Causeway, on wet potatoes and buttermilk, and never a day late for 11 years." "What a life!" cried the youth, in an accent of utter pity. "Faix, it was an elegant life, that is, when the weather was anyways good. With the bright sun shinin' and a fresh breeze blowin' the white clouds away over the Atlantic, my road was a right cheery one, and I went along inventin' stories, sometimes fairy tales, sometimes makin' rhymes to myself, but always happy and contented. There wasn't a bit of the way I hadn't a name for in my own mind, either some place I read about, or some scene in a story of my own; but better than all, there was a dog, a poor starved lurcher he was, with a bit of the tail cut off. He used to meet me, as regular as the clock, on the side of the Curragh na Gaoile, and come beside me down to the ford every day in the year. No temptation nor flattery would bring him a step farther. I spent 3/4 of an hour once tryin', but to no good. He took leave of me on the bank of the river, and went away back with his head down, as if he was grievin' over something. Wasn't that mighty curious? Perhaps, like ourselves, Billy, he wasn't quite sure of his passport," said the other, dryly. "Faix, maybe so," replied he, with perfect seriousness. "My notion was that he was the kind of an outlaw, a chap that maybe bit a child of the family, or ate a lamb of a flock given him to guard. But, indeed, his general appearance and behavior wasn't like that. He had good manners, and, starved as he was, he never snapped the bread out of my fingers, but took it gently, though his eyes was dartin' out of his head with eagerness all the while." "A great test of good breeding, truly," said the youth, sadly. "It must be more than a mere varnish when it stands the hard rubs of life in this wise." "'Tis the very notion occurred to meself. It was the drop of good blood in him that made him what he was." Stealthy and fleeting as was the look that accompanied these words, the youth saw it and blushed to the very top of his forehead. "The night grows milder," said he, to relieve the awkwardness of the moment by any remark. "It's a mighty grand sight out there now," replied the other. "There's 3 miles if there's an inch of white foam tashin' down to the sea, that breaks over the bar with a crash like thunder. Big trees are sweepin' past, and pieces of vine trellises, and a bit of a mill wheel, all carried off, just like twigs on a stream. Would money tempt those fellows, I wonder, to venture out on such a night as this? To be sure, and why not? The daily fight poverty maintains with existence dulls the sense of every danger but what comes of want. Don't I know it myself? The poor man has no enemy but hunger, for you see, the other vexations and troubles of life, there's always a way of getting round them. You can shade even grief, and you can slip away from danger, but there's no circumventing an empty stomach." "What a tyrant is then your rich man!" sighed the youth heavily. "That he is. Dives honoratus, pulcher rex denigrigum. You may do as you please if you're rich as a begum." "A free translation, rather, Billy," said the other, laughing. "Or you might render it this way," said Billy. "If you've money enough and to spare in the bank, the world will give ye both beauty and rank." "And I've nothing to say agin it," continued he. "The rale stimulus to industry in life is to make wealth powerful. Gettin' and heapin' up money for money's sake is a debasing kind of thing, but makin' a fortune, in order that you may extend your influence and mold the destinies of other, that's grand." "And see what comes of it," cried the youth bitterly. "Mark the base and unworthy subserviency it leads to. See the race of sycophants it begets." "I have you there, too," cried Billy, with all the exultation of a ready debater. "Them dirty varmint you speak of is the very test of the truth I'm tellin' you. 'Tis because they won't labor, because they won't work, that they are driven to acts of sycophancy and meanness. The spirit of industry saves a man even the excuse of doing anything low. And how often, from your own lips, have I listened to praises at your poor humble condition, rejoicing that your lot in life secured you against the cares of wealth and grandeur. And you will again, please God, if I live, and you preserve your hearing. What would I be if I was rich but an old voluptuary?" said Billy, with great emphasis on a word he had some trouble in discovering. "Atin' myself sick with delicacies, and drinking cordials all day long? How would I know the uses of wealth? Like all other vulgar creatures, I'd be buyin' with my money the respect that I ought to be buyin' with my qualities. It's the very same thing you see in a fair or a market. The country girls goin' about, hobbled and crippled with shoes on, that, if they had bare feet, could walk as straight as a rush. Poverty is not ungraceful itself. It's the tryin' to be what isn't natural spoils people entirely." "I think I hear voices without. Listen!" cried the youth. "It's only the river. It's a risin' every minute." "No, that was a shout. I heard it distinctly." "Ay, the boatmen hear it now." "It is a travelling carriage. I see the lamps," cried one of the men, as he stood at the door and looked landward. "They may as well keep the road. There's no crossing the Magra to night." By this time the postilions' whips commenced that chorus of cracking by which they are accustomed to announce all arrivals of importance. "Tell them to go back, Beppo," said the chief of the raftsmen to one of his party. "If we might try to cross with the mail bags in a boat, there's not one of us would attempt the passage on the raft." To judge from the increased noise and uproar, the travellers' impatience had now reached its highest point; but to this a slight lull succeeded, probably occasioned by the parley with the boatmen. "They'll give us 5 Napoleons for the job," said Beppo, entering, addressing his chief. "Per Deo, that won't support our families if we leave them fatherless," muttered the other. "Who and what are they that they can't wait till morning?" "Who knows?" said Beppo, with a genuine shrug of native indifference. "Princes, belike." "Princes or beggars, we all have lives to save," mumbled out an old man, as he reseated himself by the fire. Meanwhile the courier had entered the hut, and was in earnest negotiation with the chief, who, however, showed no disposition to run the hazard of the attempt. "Are you all cowards alike?" said the courier, in all the insolence of his privileged order. "Or is it a young fellow of your stamp that shrinks from the risk of a wet jacket?" This speech was addressed to the youth, whom he had mistaken for one of the raftsmen. "Keep your coarse speeches for those who will bear them, my good fellow," said the other boldly, "or mayhap the first wet jacket here will be one with gold lace on the collar." "He's not one of us, he's a traveler," quickly interposed the chief, who saw that an angry scene was brewing. "He's only waiting to cross the river," muttered he in a whisper, "when some one comes rich enough to hire the raft." "Sacre bleu! Then he shan't come with us, that I'll promise him," said the courier, whose offended dignity roused all his ire. "Now, once for all, my men, will you earn a dozen Napoleons or not? Here they are for you, if you land us safely on the other side, and never were you so well paid in your lives for an hour's labor." The sight of the gold, as it glistened temptingly in his outstretched hand, appealed to their hearts far more eloquently than all his words, and they gathered in a group together to hold counsel. "And you, are you also a distinguished stranger?" said the courier, addressing Billy, who sat warming his hands by the embers of the fire. "Look you, my man," cried the youth, "all the gold in your master's leathern bag there can give you no claim to insult those who have offered you no offence. It is enough that you know that we do not belong to the raft to suffer us to escape your notice." "Sacristi!" exclaimed the courier in a tone of insolent mockery. "I have travelled the road long enough to learn that one does not need an introduction before addressing a vagabond." "Vagabond!" cried the youth furiously, and he sprang at the other with the bound of a tiger. The courier quickly parried the blow aimed at him, and, closely grappled, they both now reeled out of the hut in terrible conflict. With that terror of the knife that figures in all Italian quarrels, the boatmen did not dare to interfere, but looked on as, wrestling with all their might, the combatants struggled, each endeavoring to push the other towards the stream. Billy, too, restrained by force, could not come to the rescue, and could only by words, screamed out in all the wildness of his agony, encourage his companion. "Drop on your knee!" "Catch him by the legs!" "Throw him back into the stream!" "That's it, that's it! Good luck to ye!" shouted he madly, as he fought like a lion with those about him. Slipping in the slimy soil, they had both now come to their knees, and after a struggle of some minutes' duration, rolled, clasped in each other's fierce embrace, down the slope into the river. A plash and a cry half smothered were heard, and all was over. While some threw themselves on the frantic creature, whose agony now overtopped his reason, and who fought to get free, with the furious rage of despair, others, seizing lanterns and torches, hurried along the bank of the torrent to try and rescue the combatants. A sudden winding of the river at the place gave little hope to the search, and it was all but certain that the current must already have swept them down far beyond any chance of succor. Assisted by the servants of the traveler, who speedily were apprised of the disaster, the search was continued for hours, and morning at length began to break over the dreary scene without one ray of hope. By the gray, cold dawn the yellow flood could be seen for a considerable distance, and the banks, too, over which a gauzy mist was hanging. But not a living thing was there. The wild torrent swept along his murky course with a deep, monotonous roar. Trunks of trees and leafy branches rose and sank in the wavy flood, but nothing suggested the vaguest hope that either had escaped. The traveler's carriage returned to Spezia, and Billy, now bereft of reason, was conveyed to the same place, fast tied with cords, to restrain him from a violence that threatened his own life and that of any near him. In the evening of that day a peasant's car arrived at Spezia, conveying the almost lifeless courier who had been found on the river's bank near the mouth of the Magra. How he had reached the spot, or what had become of his antagonist, he knew not. Indeed, the fever which soon set in placed him beyond the limit of all questioning, and his incoherent cries and ravings only betrayed the terrible agonies his mind must have passed through. If this tragic incident, heightened by the actual presence of two of the actors, one all but dead, the other dying, engaged the entire interest and sympathy of the little town, the authorities were actively employed in investigating the event, and ascertaining, so far as they could, to which side the chief blame inclined. The raftsmen had all been arrested, and were examined carefully, one by one, and now it only remained to obtain from the traveller himself whatever information he could contribute to throw light on the affair. His passport, showing that he was an English peer, obtained for him all the deference and respect foreign officials are accustomed to render to that title, and the prefect announced that if it suited his convenience, he would wait on his lordship at his hotel to receive his deposition. "I have nothing to depose, no information to give," was the dry and not over courteous response. But as the visit, it was intimated, was indispensable, he named his hour to admit him. The bland and polite tone of the prefect was met by a manner of cold but well-bred ease, which seemed to imply that the traveller only regarded the incident in the light of an unpleasant interruption to his journey, but in which he took no other interest. Even the hints thrown out that he ought to consider himself aggrieved and his dignity insulted produced no effect upon him. "It was my intention to have halted a few days at Massa, and I could have obtained another courier in the interval," was the cool commentary he bestowed on the incident. "But your lordship would surely desire investigation. A man is missing, a great crime may have been committed. Excuse my interrupting, but as I am not, nor can be supposed to be, the criminal, nor do I feel myself the victim, while I have not a claim to the character of witness, you would only harass me with interrogatories I could not answer, and excite me to take interest, or at least bestow attention, on what cannot concern me." "Yet there are circumstances in this case which give it the character of a preconcerted plan," said the prefect, thoughtfully. "Perhaps so," said the other, in a tone of utter indifference. "Certainly the companion of the man who is missing, and of whom no clue can be discovered, is reported to have uttered your name repeatedly in his ravings." "My name? How so?" cried the stranger hurriedly. "Yes, my lord, the name of your passport, Lord Glencore. Two of those I have placed to watch beside his bed have repeated the same story, and told how he has never ceased to mutter the name to himself in his wanderings." "Is this a mere fancy?" said the stranger, over whose sickly features a flush now mantled. "Can I see him?" "Of course. He is in the hospital, and too ill to be removed, but if you will visit him there, I will accompany you." It was only when a call was made upon Lord Glencore for some bodily exertion that his extreme debility became apparent. Seated at ease in a chair, his manner seemed merely that of natural coolness and apathy. He spoke as one who would not suffer his nature to be ruffled by any avoidable annoyance. But now, as he rose from his seat and endeavored to walk, One side betrayed unmistakable signs of palsy, and his general frame exhibited the last stage of weakness. You see, sir, that the exertion costs its price," said he, with a sad, sickly smile. "I am the wreck of what once was a man noted for his strength." The other muttered some words of comfort and compassion, and they descended the stairs together. "I do not know this man," said Lord Glencore, as he gazed on the flushed and fevered face of the sick man, whose ill-trimmed and shaggy beard gave additional wildness to his look. "I have never, to my knowledge, seen him before." The accents of the speaker appeared to have suddenly struck some chord in the sufferer's intelligence, for he struggled for an instant, and then, raising himself on his elbow, stared fixedly at him. "Not know me?" cried he in English. "'Tis because sorrow and sickness has changed me, then. Who are you? Tell me your name," said Glencore, eagerly. "I'm Billy Traynor, my lord, the one you remember, the doctor, and my boy," screamed Glencore, wildly. The sick man threw up both his arms in the air, and fell backward with a cry of despair, while Glencore, tottering for an instant, sank with a low groan and fell senseless on the ground. CHAPter 46. Recording by Linda Andrus.
Chapter 47 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 47. A Fragment of a Letter. Long before Lord Glencore had begun to rally from an attack which had revived all the symptoms of his former illness, Billy Traynor had perfectly recovered, and was assiduously occupied in attending him. Almost the first tidings which Glencore could comprehend assured him that the boy was safe, and living at Massa under the protection of the Chevalier Stubber, and waiting eagerly for Billy to join him. A brief extract from one of the youth's letters to his warm-hearted follower will suffice to show how he himself regarded the incident which befell, and the fortune that lay before him. "It was a long swing, on a dark night, too, Master Billy, and whenever the arm of a tree would jostle me, as it floated past, I felt as though that blessed courier was again upon me, and turned to give fight at once. If it were not that the river took a sudden bend as it nears the sea, I must infallibly have been carried out; but I found myself quite suddenly in slack water, and very soon after it shallowed, so much that I could walk ashore. The thought of what became of my adversary weighed more heavily on me when I touched land. Indeed, while my own chances of escape were few, I took his fate easily enough. With all its dangers, it was a glorious time, as, hurrying downward in the torrent, through the dark night, the thunder growling overhead, the breakers battering away on the bar, I was the only living thing there to confront that peril. What an emblem of my own fate in everything! A headlong course, an unknown ending, darkness, utter and dayless darkness, around me, and not one single soul to say, "Courage!" There is something splendidly exciting in the notion of having felt thoughts that others have never felt, of having set footsteps in that untracked sand where no traveller has ever ventured. This impression left me as I buffeted the murky waves, and struck out boldly through the surfy stream. Nay, more, it will never leave me while I live. I have now proved myself to my own heart. I have been, and for a considerable time too, face to face with death. I have regarded my fate as certain, and yet I have not quailed in spirit or flinched in coolness. No, Billy, I reviewed every step of my strange and wayward life. I bethought me of my childhood, with all its ambitious longings, and my boyish days as sorrow first broke upon me, and I felt that there was a fitness in this darksome and mysterious ending to a life that touched on no other existence. For am I not as much alone in the great world as when I swam there in the yellow flood of the Magra? As the booming breakers of the sea met my ear, and I saw that I was nearing the wide ocean, I felt as might a soldier when charging an enemy's battery at speed. I was wildly mad with impatience to get forward, and shouted till my voice rang out above the din around me. How the mad cheer echoed in my own heart! It was the trumpet call of victory. Was it reaction from all this excitement, the depression that follows past danger, that made me feel low and miserable afterwards? I know I walked along towards Lavenza in listlessness, and when a gendarme stopped to question me, and asked me for my passport, I had not even energy to tell him how I came there. Even the intense desire to see that spot once more, to walk that garden and sit upon that terrace, all had left me. It was as though the waves had drowned the spirit, and left the limbs to move unguided. He led me beside the walls of the villa, by the little wicket itself, and still I felt no touch of feeling, no memory came back on me. I was indifferent to all, and yet you know how many a weary mile I have come just to see them once more, to revisit a spot where the only daydream of my life lingered, and where I gave way to the promptings of a hope that have not warmed this sad heart. What a sluggish swamp has this nature of mine become, when it needs a hurricane of passion to stir it! Here I am, living, breathing, walking, and sleeping, but without one sentiment that attaches me to existence, and yet do I feel as though whatever endangered life or jeoparded fame would call me up to an effort, and make of me some value to myself. I went yesterday to see my old studio. Sorry things were those strivings of mine, false endeavours to realise conceptions that must have some other interpreter than marble. Forms are but weak appeals, words are coarse ones. Music alone, my dear friend, is the true voice of the heart's meanings. How a little melody that a peasant girl was singing last night touched me. It was one that she used to warble, humming as we walked, like some stray waif thrown up by memory on the waste of life. So then at last I feel I am not a sculptor. Still as little, with all your teaching, am I a scholar. The world of active life offers to me none of its seductions. I only recognize what there is in it of vulgar contention and low rivalry. I cannot be any of the 100 things by which men eke out subsistence, and yet I long for the independence of being the arbiter of my own daily life. What is to become of me? Say, dearest, best of friends, say but the word, and let me try to obey you. What of our old plans of savagery? The fascinations of civilized habit have made no stronger hold upon me since we relinquished that grand idea. Neither you nor I, assuredly, have any places assigned us at the feast of this old world life, nor have bidden us to it, nor have we even the fitting garments to grace it. There are moments, however, one of them is on me while I write, wherein I should like to storm that strong citadel of social exclusion and test its strength. Who are they who garrison it? Are they better and wiser and purer than their fellows? Are they lifted by the accidents of fortune above the casualties and infirmities of nature? And are they more gentle-minded, more kindly-hearted, and more forgiving than others? This I should wish to know and learn for myself. Would they admit us for the nonce, to see and judge them, let the bastard and the beggar sit down at their board, and make brotherhood with them? I trow not, Billy. They would hand us over to the police. And my friend the courier was not so far astray when he called us vagabonds. If I were free I should of course be with you, but I am under a kind of mild bondage here, of which I don't clearly comprehend the meaning. The chief minister has taken me in some fashion under his protection, and I am given to understand that no ill is intended me, and, indeed, so far as treatment and moderate liberty are concerned, I have every reason to be satisfied. Still is there something deeply wounding in all this mysterious consideration. It whispers to me of an interest in me on the part of those who are ashamed to avow it, of kind feelings held in check by self-esteem. Good heavens, what have I done, that this humiliation should be my portion? There is no need of any subtlety to teach me what I am, and what the world insists I must remain. There is no ambition I dare to strive for, no affection my heart may cherish, no honourable contest I may engage in, but that the utterance of one fatal word may not bar the gate against my entrance, and send me back in shame and confusion. Had I of myself incurred this penalty, there would be in me that stubborn sense of resistance that occurs to every one who counts the gain and loss of all his actions. But I have not done so. In the work of my own degradation I am blameless. I have been told that a certain Princess de Sabloukoff is to arrive here this evening, and that I am to wait upon her immediately. Good heavens! Can she be? The thought has just struck me, and my head is already wandering at the bare notion of it. How I pray that this may not be so! My own shame is enough, and more than I can bear, but to bear witness that can you tell me nothing of this? But even if you can, the tidings will come too late. I shall have already seen her. I am unable to write more now. My brain is burning, and my hand trembles so that I cannot trace the letters. Adieu till this evening. Midnight. I was all in error, dear friend. I have seen her. For the last 2 hours we have conversed together, and my suspicion had no foundation. She evidently knows all my history, and almost gives me to believe that one day or other I may stand free of this terrible shame that oppresses me. If this were possible, what vengeance would be enough to wreak on those who have thus practised on me? Can you imagine any vendetta that would pay off the heart-corroding misery that has made my youth like a sorrowful old age, dried up hope within me, made my ambition to be a snare, and my love a mere mockery? I could spend a life in the search after this revenge, and think it all too short to exhaust it. I have much to tell you of this princess, but I doubt if I can remember it. Her manner meant so much, and yet so little. There was such elegance of expression, with such perfect ease, so much of the finest knowledge of life united to a kind of hopeful trust in mankind, that I kept eternally balancing in my mind whether her intelligence or her kindliness had the supremacy. She spoke to me much of the Harleys. Ida was well, and at Florence. She had refused Wahnsdorf's offer of marriage, and though ardently solicited to let time test her decision, persisted in her rejection. Whether she knew of my affection or not, I cannot say, but I opine not, for she talked of Ida as one whose haughty nature would decline alliance with even an imperial house if they deemed it a condescension, and that the refusal of Wahnsdorf may have been on this ground. But how can it matter to me? I am to remain here a week, I think they said. Sir Horace Upton is coming on his way south, and wishes to see me, but you will be here with me ere that time, and then we can plan our future together. As this web of intrigue, for so I cannot but feel it, draws more closely around me, I grow more and more impatient to break bounds and be away. It is evident enough that my destiny is to be the sport of some accident, lucky or unlucky, in the fate of others. Shall I await this? And they have given me money, and fine clothes, and a servant to wait upon me, and treated me like one of condition. Is this but another act of the drama, the first scene of which was an old ruined castle in Ireland? They will fail signally if they think so. A heart can be broken only once. They may even feel sorry for what they have done, but I can never forgive them for what they have made me. Come to me, dear kind friend, as soon as you can. You little know how far your present reconciles me to the world and to yourself. Ever yours, C.M. This letter Billy Traynor read over and over as he sat by Glencore's bedside. It was his companion in the long, dreary hours of the night, and he pondered over it as he sat in the darkened room at noonday. "What is that you are crumpling up there? From whom is the letter?" said Lord Glencore, as Billy hurriedly endeavoured to conceal the oft-perused epistle. "Nay," cried he, suddenly correcting himself, "you need not tell me. I asked without forethought." He paused a few seconds, and then went on. "I am now as much recovered as I ever hoped to be, and you may leave me to–morrow. I know that both your wish and your duty call you elsewhere. Whatever future fortune may betide any of us, you at least have been a true and faithful friend, and shall never want. As I count upon your honesty to keep a pledge, I reckon on your delicacy not asking the reasons for it. You will, therefore, not speak of having been with me here. To mention me would be but to bring up bitter memories." In the pause which now ensued, Billy Traynor's feelings underwent a sore trial; for while he bethought him that now or never had come the moment to reconcile the father and the son, thus mysteriously separated, his fears also whispered the danger of any ill–devised step on his part, and the injury he might by possibility inflict on one he loved best on earth. "You make me this pledge, therefore, before we part," said Lord Glencore, who continued to ruminate on what he had spoken. "It is less for my sake than that of another." Billy took the hand Glencore tendered towards him respectfully in his own, and kissed it twice. "There are men who have no need of oaths to ratify their faith and trustfulness. You are one of them, Traynor," said Glencore, affectionately. Billy tried to speak, but his heart was too full, and he could not utter a word. "A dying man's words have ever their solemn weight," said Glencore, "and mine beseech you not to desert one who has no prize in life equal to your friendship. Promise me nothing, but do not forget my prayer to you." And with this Lord Glencore turned away and buried his face between his hands. "And in the name of Heaven," muttered Billy to himself as he stole away, "what is it that keeps them apart and won't let them love one another? Sure it wasn't in nature that a boy of his years could ever do what would separate them this way. What could he possibly say or do that his father mightn't forget and forgive by this time? And then, if it wasn't the child's fault at all, where's the justice in making him pay for another's crime? Sure enough, great people must be unlike poor craturs like me, in their hearts and feelings as well as in their grandeur, and there must be things that we never mind nor think of, that are thought to be mortal injuries by them. Ay, and that is raisonable too. We see the same in the material world. There's fevers that some never takes, and there's climates some can live in, and no others can bear. I suppose now," said he, with a wise shake of the head, "pride is at the root of it all, some way or other, and if it is, I may give up the investigation at onst, for divil a one of me knows what pride is, barring it's the delight one feels in construing a hard bit of a Greek chorus, or hitting the maning of a doubtful passage in old Aeschylus. But what's the good of me puzzling myself? If I was to speculate for 50 years, I'd never be able to think like a lord after all." And with this conclusion he began to prepare for his journey. Chapter 48 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 48. How a Sovereign treats with his Minister. "What can have brought them here, Stubber?" said the Duke of Massa, as he walked to and fro in his dressing–room with an air of considerable perturbation. "Be assured of one thing, they have come for mischief. I know that Sabloukoff well. She it was separated Prince Max from my sister, and that Montenegro affair was all her doing also. "I don't suspect—" "Don't you? Well, then, I do, sir, and that's enough," said he, interrupting. "And as to Upton, he is well known throughout Europe. A mauvais coucheur, Stubber, that's what the Emperor Franz called him, a mauvais coucheur, one of those fellows England employs to get up the embarrassments she so deeply deplores. Eh, Stubber, that's the phrase, while we deeply deplore the condition of the kingdom. That's always the exordium to sending out a fleet or an impertinent dispatch. But I'll not endure it here. I have my sovereign rights, my independence, my allies. By the way, haven't my allies taken possession of the Opera House for a barrack?" "That they have, sir, and they threaten an encampment in the Court gardens." "An open insult, an outrage. And have you endured and submitted to this?" "I have refused the permission, but they may very possibly take no heed of my protest." "And you'll tell me that I am the ruler of this state?" "No, but I'll say you might if you'd like to be so." "How so, Stubber? Come, my worthy fellow, what's your plan? You have a plan, I'm certain. But I guess it. Turn Protestant, hunt out the Jesuits, close the churches, demolish the monasteries, and send for an English frigate down to the marina, where there's not water to float a fishing boat. But no, sir, I'll have no such alliances. I'll throw myself upon the loyalty and attachment of my people, and I'll raise the taxes, eh, Stubber? We'll tax the colza and the quarries. If they demur, we'll abdicate. That's my last word, abdicate." "I wonder who this sick man can be that accompanies Upton," said Stubber, who never suffered himself to be moved by his master's violence. "Another firebrand, another emissary of English disturbance. Hardenberg was perfectly right when he said the English nation pays off the meanest subserviency to their own aristocracy by hunting down all that is noble in every state of Europe. There, sir, he hit the mark in the very centre. Slaves at home, rebels abroad. That's your code." "We'll contrive to mix up a fair share of liberty with our bondage, sir." "In your talk, only in your talk, and in the newspapers, Stubber, I have studied you closely and attentively. You submit to more social indignities than any nation, ancient or modern. I was in London in '15, and I remember at a racecourse, Ascot they called it, the Prince had a certain horse called Rufus." "I rode him," said Stubber, dryly. "You rode him?" "Yes, sir. I was his jock for the King's Plate. There was a matter of 28 started, the largest field ever known for the Cup, and Rufus reared, and, falling back, killed his rider, and the Duke of Dunrobin sent for me and told me to mount. That's the way I came to be there." "Per Bacco, it was a splendid race, and I'm sure I never suspected when I cheered you coming in that I was welcoming my future minister. Eh, Stubber? Only fancy what a change!" Stubber only shrugged his shoulders, as though the alteration in fortune was no such great prize after all. "I won 2,000 guineas on that day, Stubber. Lord Heddleworth paid me in gold, I remember, for they picked my pocket of 3 rouleaux on the course. The Prince laughed so at dinner about it, and said it was pure patriotism not to suffer exportation of bullion. A great people, the English, that I must say. The display of wealth was the grandest spectacle I ever beheld, and such beauty too. By the way, Stubber, our ballet here is detestable. Where did they gather together that gang of horrors?" "What? Signifies it, sir, if the Austrian Jägers are bivouacked in the theatre?" "Very true, by Jove," said the Duke, pondering. "Can't we hit upon something? Have you no happy suggestion?" "I have it, Stubber, an admirable thought. We'll have Upton to dinner. We'll make it appear that he has come here specially to treat with us. There is a great coldness just now between St. James's and Vienna. Upton will be charmed with the thought of an intrigue. So will be La Sabloukoff. We'll not invite the Field Marshal Rosencrantz. That will itself offend Austria. Eh, Stubber, isn't it good? Say to-morrow at 6, and go yourself with the invitation." And, overjoyed with the notion of his own subtlety, the Prince walked up and down, laughing heartily, and rubbing his hands in glee. Stubber, however, was too well versed in the changeability of his master's nature to exhibit any rash promptitude in obeying him. "You must manage to let the English papers speak of this, Stubber. The Augsburg Gazette will be sure to copy the paragraph, and what a sensation it will create at Vienna! I am inclined to think Upton has come here about that young fellow we gave up to the Austrians last autumn, and for whom he desires to claim some compensation and an ample apology." "Apology, of course, Stubber. Humiliation to any extent. I'll send the Minister Landelli into exile. To the galleys, if they insist. But I'll not pay a scudo. My royal word on it. But who says that such is the reason for his presence here?" "I had a hint of it last night, and I received a polite note from Upton this morning, asking when he might have a few moments' conversation with me." "Go to him, Stubber, with our invitation. Ask him if he likes shooting. Say I am going to Seravezza on Saturday. Sound him out if he desires to have the Red Cross of Massa. Hint that I am an ardent admirer of his public career, and be sure to tell me something he has said or done, if he comes to dinner." "There is to be a dinner, then, sir?" asked Stubber, with the air of one partly struggling with a conviction. "I have said so, Chevalier," replied the Prince haughtily, and in the tone of a man whose decisions were irrevocable. "I mean to dine in the state apartments, and to have a reception in the evening, just to show Rosencrantz how cheaply we hold him. Eh, Stubber? It will half kill him to come with the general company." Stubber gave a faint sigh, as though fresh complications and more troubles would be the sole results of this brilliant tactique. "If I were well served and faithfully obeyed, there is not a sovereign in Europe who would boast a more independent position, protected by my bold people, environed by my native Apennines, and sustained by the proud consciousness that I cannot injure a state which has not sixpence in the treasury. Eh, Stubber?" cried he, with a burst of merry laughter. "That's the grand feature of composure and dignity, to know you can't be worse. And this we Italian princes can all indulge in. Look at the Pope himself. He is collecting the imposts a year in advance." "I hope that this country is more equitably administered," said Stubber. "So do I, sir. Were I not impressed with the full conviction that the subjects of this realm were in the very fullest enjoyment of every liberty consistent with public tranquillity, protected in the maintenance of every privilege. By the way, talking of privileges, they mustn't play trottolo on the high roads. They sent one of those cursed wheels flying between the legs of my horse yesterday, so that if I hadn't been an old cavalry soldier, I might have been thrown. I ordered the whole village to be fined 300 scudi, one half of which to be sent to the shrine of Our Lady of Loretta, who really, I believe, kept me in my saddle." "If the people had sufficient occupation, they'd not play trottolo," said Stubber sternly. "And whose the fault if they have not, sir? How many months have I been entreating to have those terraced gardens finished towards the sea? I want that olive wood, too, all stubbed up, and the ground laid out in handsome parterres. How repeatedly have I asked for a bridge over that ornamental lake! And as to the island, there's not a magnolia planted in it yet. Public works, indeed! Find me the money, Stubber, and I'll suggest the works. Then there's that villa, the residence of those English people. Have we not made a purchase of it?" "No, your Highness, we could not agree about the terms, and I have just heard that the stranger who is travelling with Upton is going to buy it." "Stepping in between me and an object I have in view? And in my own duchy, too, and you have the hardihood to tell me you knew of and permitted this negotiation to go on?" "There is nothing in the law to prevent it, sir." "The law! What impertinence to tell me of the law! Why, sir, it is I am the law. I am the head and fountain of all law here. Without my sanction, what can presume to be legal?" "I opine that the act which admits foreigners to possess property in the state was passed in the life of your Highness's father." "I repeal it, then. It saps the nationality of a people. It is a blow aimed at the very heart of independent sovereignty. I may stand alone in all Europe on this point, but I will maintain it. And as to this stranger, let his passport be sent to him on the spot." "He may possibly be an Englishman, your Highness, and remember that we have already a troublesome affair on our hands with that other youth who in some way claims Upton's protection. Had we not better go more cautiously to work? I can see and speak with him." "What a tyranny is this English interference! There is not a land from Sweden to Sicily where, on some assumed ground of humanity, your government have not dared to impose their opinions. You presume to assert that all men must feel precisely like your dogged and hard-headed countrymen, and that what are deemed grievances in your land should be thought so elsewhere. You write up a code for the whole world, built out of the materials of all your national prejudices, your insular conceit, aye, and out of the very exigencies of your bad climate. And then you say to us, blessed in the enjoyment of light hearts and God's sunshine, that we must think and feel as you do. I am not astonished that my nobles are discontented with the share you possess of my confidence. They must long have seen how little suited the maxims of your national policy are to the habits of a happier population." "The people are far better than their nobles, that I'm sure of," said Stubber stoutly. "You want to preach socialism to me, and hope to convert me to that splendid doctrine of communism we hear so much of. You are a dangerous fellow, a very dangerous fellow. It was precisely men of your stamp sapped the monarchy in France, and with it all monarchy in Europe." "If your Highness intends Proserpine to run at Bologna, she ought to be put in training at once," said Stubber gravely, "and we might send up some of the weeds at the same time, and sell them off." "Well thought of, Stubber. And there was something else in my head. What was it?" "The suppression of the San Lorenzo convent, perhaps. It is all completed, and only waits your Highness to sign the deed." "What sum does it give us, Stubber, eh?" "About 180,000 scudi, sir, of which some 20,000 go to the National Mortgage Fund." "Not a crown of it, not a single bajocco, as I am a Christian knight and a true gentleman. I need it all, if it were twice as much. If we incur the anger of the Pope and the Sacred College, if we risk the thunders of the Vatican, let us have the worldly consolation of a full purse." "I advise the measure on wiser grounds, sir. It was not fair and just that a set of lazy friars should be leading lives of indolence and abundance in the midst of a hard-worked and ill-fed peasantry." "Quite true. And on these wise grounds, as you call them, we have rooted them out. We only wish that the game were more plenty, for the sport amuses us vastly." And he clapped Stubber familiarly on the shoulders, and laughed heartily at his jest. It was in this happy frame of mind that Stubber always liked to leave his master, and so, promising to attend to the different subjects discussed between them, he bowed and withdrew. Chapter 49 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 49. Social Diplomacies. "What an insufferable bore, dear Princess!" sighed Sir Horace as he opened the square-shaped envelope that contained his Royal Highness's invitation to dinner. "I mean to be seriously indisposed," said Madame de Sabloukoff. "One gets nothing but chagrin in intercourse with petty courts. Like provincial journals, they only reproduce what has appeared in the metropolitan papers, and give you old gossip for fresh intelligence. Or worse again, ask you to take an interest in their miserable localisms, the microscopic contentions of insect life." "They have given us a sentry at the door, I perceive," said Sir Horace, with assumed indifference. "A very proper attention," remarked the lady, in a tone that more than half implied the compliment was one intended for herself. "Have you seen the Chevalier Stubber yet?" asked Upton. "No, he has been twice here, but I was dressing or writing notes. And you?" "I told him to come about 2 o'clock," sighed Sir Horace. "I rather like Stubber." This was said in a tone of such condescension that it sounded as though the utterer was confessing to an amicable weakness in his nature. "I rather like Stubber." Though there was something meant to invite agreement in the tone, the Princess only accepted the speech with a slight motion of her eyebrows, and a look of half unwilling assent. "I know he's not of your world, dear Princess, but he belongs to that Anglo-Saxon stock we are so prone to associate with all the ideas of rugged, unadorned virtue." "Rugged and unadorned, indeed!" echoed the lady. "And yet never vulgar," rejoined Upton. "Never affecting to be other than he is, and, stranger still, not self-opinionated and conceited." "I own to you," she said haughtily, "that the whole court here puts me in mind of Hayti, with its Marquis of Orgeat and its Count Marmalade. These people, elevated from menial station to a mock nobility, only serve to throw ridicule upon themselves and the order that they counterfeit. No socialism in Europe has done such service to the cause of democracy as the Prince of Massa. Honesty is such a very rare quality in this world that I am not surprised at his Highness prizing it under any garb. Now, Stubber is honest." "He says so himself, I am told." "Yes, he says so, and I believe him. He has been employed in situations of considerable trust, and always acquitted himself well. Such a man cannot have escaped temptations, and yet even his enemies do not accuse him of venality." "Good heavens! What more would he have than his legitimate spoils? He is a minister of the household, with an ample salary, a master of the horse, an inspector of woods and forests, a something over church lands, and a red cross of Massa besides. I am quite made up in his dignities, for they are all set forth on his visiting card, with what purports to be a coat of arms at top." And as she spoke, she held out the card in derision. "That's silly, I must say," said Upton, smiling. "And yet I suppose that here in Massa it was requisite he should assert all his pretensions thus openly." "Perhaps so," said she, dryly. "And, after all," said Upton, who seemed rather bent on a system of mild tormenting, "after all, there is something amiable in the weakness of this display. It smacks of gratitude. It is like saying to the world, 'See what the munificence of my master has made me.'" What a delicate compliment, too, to his nobles, which proclaims that for a station of trust and probity the prince must recruit from the kitchen and the stables. To my thinking, there is no such impertinent delusion as that popular one which asserts that we must seek for everything in its least likely place. Take ministers out of counting-houses and military commanders from shop-boards. For the treatment of weighty questions in peace or war, the gentleman element is the first essential." "Just as long as the world thinks so, dear Princess." "Not an hour longer." The Princess arose and walked the room in evident displeasure. She half suspected that his objections were only devices to irritate, and she determined not to prolong the discussion. The temptation to reply proved, however, too strong for her resolution, and she said, "The world has thought so for some centuries, and when a passing shade of doubt has shaken the conviction, have not the people rushed from revolution into actual bondage, as though any despotism were better than the tyranny of their own passions?" "I opine," said Upton, calmly, "that the prestige of the gentleman consists in his belonging to an order. Now, that is a privilege that cannot be enjoyed by a mere popular leader. It is like the contrast between a club and a public meeting." "It is something that you confess these people have no prestige," said she, triumphantly. "Indeed, their presence in the world of politics, to my thinking, is a mere symbol of change, an evidence that we are in some stage of transition." "So we are, madame. There is nothing more true. Every people of Europe have outgrown their governments, like their young heirs risen to manhood, ordering household affairs to their will. The popular voice now swells above the whisper of cabinets. So long as each country limits itself to home questions, this spirit will attract but slight notice. Let the issue, however, become a great international one, and you will see the popular will declaring wars, cementing alliances, and signing peaces in a fashion to make statecraft tremble." "And you approve of this change, and welcome it?" asked she, derisively. "I have never said so, madame. I foresee the hurricane, that's all. Men like Stubber are to be seen almost everywhere throughout Europe. They are a kind of declaration that, for the government and guidance of mankind, the possession of a good head and an honest heart is amply sufficient; that rulers neither need 14 quarterings nor names coeval with the Roman Empire." "You have given me but another reason to detest him," said the Princess, angrily. "I don't think I shall receive him to-day." "But you want to speak with him about that villa. There is some formality to be gone through before a foreigner can own property here. I think you promised Glencore you would arrange the matter." She made no reply, and he continued: "Poor fellow! A very short lease would suffice for his time. He is sinking rapidly. The conflict his mind wages between hope and doubt has hastened all the symptoms of his malady." "In such a struggle a woman has more courage than a man." "Say more boldness, Princess," said Upton, slyly. "I repeat, courage, sir. It is fear, and nothing but fear, that agitates him. He is afraid of the world's sneer, afraid of what society will think, and say, and write about him, afraid of the petty gossip of the millions he will never see or hear of. This cowardice it is that checks him in every aspiration to vindicate his wife's honour and his boy's birth." "Si cela se peut," said Upton, with a very equivocal smile. A look of haughty anger, with a flush of crimson on her cheek, was the only answer she made him. "I mean that he is really not in a position to prove or disprove anything. He assumed certain levities, I suppose the word will do, to mean more than levities. He construed indiscretions into grave faults, and faults into crimes. But that he did all this without sufficient reason, or that he now has abundant evidence that he was mistaken, I am unable to say, nor is it with broken faculties and a wandering intellect that he can be expected to review the past and deliver judgment on it. The whole moral of which is, what a luckless fate is that of a foreign wife united to an English husband." "There is much force in the remark," said Upton, calmly. "To have her thoughts and words and actions submitted to the standard of a nation whose moral subtleties she could never comprehend, to be taught that a certain amount of gloom must be mixed up with life, just as bitters are taken for tonics; that ennui is the sure type of virtue, the low spirits the healthiest condition of the mind, these are her first lessons. No wonder if she finds them hard ones. To be told that all the harmless familiarities she has seen from her childhood are dangerous freedoms, all the innocent gaieties of the world about her are snares and pitfalls, is to make existence little better than a penal servitude. This is lesson the second. While, to complete her education, she is instructed how to assume a censorial rigidity of manner that would shame a duenna, and a condemnatory tone that assumes to arraign all the criminals of society and pass sentence on them. How amiable she may become in disposition, and how suitable as a companion by this training, you, sir, and your countrymen are best able to pronounce." "You rather exaggerate our demerits, my dear Princess," said Upton, smiling. "We really do not like to be so very odious as you would make us. You are excellent people with whom no one can live, that's the whole of it," said she, with a saucy laugh. "If your friend Lord Glencore had been satisfied to stay at home and marry one of his own nation, he might have escaped a deal of unhappiness, and saved a most amiable creature much more sorrow than falls to the lot of the least fortunate of her own country." "I conclude you have some influence over him." "As much, perhaps, as any one, but even that says little." "Can you not use it, therefore, to make him repair a great wrong?" "You had some plan, I think," said he, hesitatingly. "Yes, I have written to her to come down here. I have pretended that her presence is necessary to certain formalities about the sale of the villa. I mean that they should meet, without apprising either of them. I have sent the boy out of the way to Pontremoli to make me a copy of some frescoes there, till the success of my scheme be decided. I did not wish to make him a party to it." "You don't know Glencore, at least as I know him." "There is no reason that I should," broke she in. "What I would try is an experiment, every detail of which I would leave to chance. Were this a case where all the wrong were on one side, and all the forgiveness to come from the other, friendly aid and imposition might well be needed. But here is a complication which neither you nor I nor anyone else can pretend to unravel. Let them meet, therefore, and let fate, if that be the name for it, decide what all the prevention and planning in the world could never provide for." "The very fact that their meeting has been plotted beforehand will suggest distrust." "Their manner in meeting will be the best answer to that," said she, resolutely. "There will be no acting between them, depend upon't. He told me that he had destroyed the registry of their marriage, nor does he know where a single witness of the ceremony can be found." "I don't want to know how he could make the amende till I know that he is ready to do it," said she, in the same calm tone. "To have arranged a meeting with the boy had perhaps been better than this. Glencore has not avowed it, but I think I can detect misgivings for his treatment of the youth. This was my first thought, and I spoke to young Massey the evening before Lord Glencore arrived. I led him to tell me of his boyish days in Ireland, and his home there. A stern resolution to master all emotion seemed to pervade whatever he said, and though perhaps the effort may have cost him much, his manner did not betray it. He told me that he was illegitimate, that the secret was divulged to him by his own father, that he had never heard who his mother was, nor what rank in life she occupied. When I said that she was one in high station, that she was alive and well, and one of my own dearest friends, a sudden crimson covered his face, as quickly followed by a sickly pallor, and though he trembled in every limb, he never spoke a word. I endeavoured to excite in him some desire to learn more of her, if not to see her, but in vain. The hard lesson he had taught himself enabled him to repress every semblance of feeling. It was only when at last, driven to the very limits of my patience, I abruptly asked him, "Have you no wish to see your mother?" that his coldness gave way, and in a voice tremulous and thick he said, "My shame is enough for myself." I was burning to say more, to put before him a contingency, the mere shadow of a possibility that his claim to birth and station might one day or other be vindicated. I did not actually do so, but I must have let drop some chance word that betrayed my meaning, for he caught me up quickly, and said, "It would come too late, if it came even to-day. I am that which I am by many a hard struggle. You'll never see me risk a disappointment in life by any encouragement I may give to hope." I then adverted to his father, but he checked me at once, saying, "When the ties that should be closest in life are stained with shame and dishonour, they are bonds of slavery, not of affection. My debt to Lord Glencore is the degradation I live in, none other. His heritage to me is the undying conflict in my heart between what I once thought I was and what I now know I am. If we met, it would be to tell him so. In a word, every feature of his father's proud unforgivingness is reproduced in the boy, and I dreaded the very possibility of their meeting. If ever Lord Glencore avow his marriage and vindicate his wife's honour, his hardest task will be reconciliation with this boy." "All, and more than all, the evils I anticipated have followed this insane vengeance," said Upton. "I begin to think that one ought to leave a golden bridge even to our revenge, Princess." "Assuredly, wherever a woman is the victim," said she, smiling, "for you are so certain to have reasons for distrusting yourself." Upton sat meditating for some time on the plan of the Princess. Had it only originated with himself, it was exactly the kind of project he would have liked. He knew enough of life to be aware that one can do very little more than launch events upon the great ocean of destiny, that the pretension to guide and direct them is oftener a snare than anything else, that the contingencies and accidents, the complications too, which beset every move in life, disconcert all one's prearrangements, so that it is rare indeed when we are able to pursue the same path towards any object by which we have set out. As the scheme was, however, that of another, he now scrutinized it, and weighed every objection to its accomplishment, constantly returning to the same difficulty, as he said: "You do not know Glencore." "The man who has but one passion, one impulse in life, is rarely a difficult study," was the measured reply. "Lord Glencore's vengeance has worn itself out, exactly as all similar outbreaks of temper do, for want of opposition. There was nothing to feed, nothing to minister to it. He sees, I have taken care that he should see, that his bolt has not struck the mark, that her position is not the precarious thing he meant to make it, but a station as much protected and fenced round by its own conventionalities as that of any, the proudest lady in society. For one that dares to impugn her, there are full 50 ready to condemn him, and all this has been done without reprisal or recrimination. No partisanship to arraign his moroseness and his cruelty. None of that coterie defence which divides society into two sections. This, of course, has wounded his pride, but it has not stimulated his anger. But, above all, it has imparted to her the advantage of a dignity, of which his vengeance was intended to deprive her." "You must be a sanguine and a hopeful spirit, Princess, if you deem that such elements will unite happily hereafter," said Upton, smiling. "I really never carried my speculation so far," replied she. "It is in actual life, as in that of the stage, quite sufficient to accompany the actors to the fall of the curtain." "The Chevalier Stubber, madame," said a servant, entering, "wishes to know if you will receive him." "Yes, no, yes, tell him to come in," said she rapidly, as she resumed her seat beside the fire. Chapter 49. Chapter 50 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 50. Ante-Dinner Reflections. Notwithstanding the strongly expressed sentiments of the Princess with regard to the Chevalier Stubber, she received him with marked favour, and gave him her hand to kiss with evident cordiality. As for Upton, it was the triumph of his manner to deal with men separated widely from himself in station and abilities. He could throw such an air of good fellowship into the smallest attentions, impart such a glow of kindliness to the veriest commonplaces, that the very craftiest and shrewdest could never detect. As he leaned his arm, therefore, on Stubber's shoulder, and smiled benignly on him, you would have said it was the affectionate meeting with a long-absent brother. But there was something besides this. There was an expansive confidence accorded to a trusty colleague, and as he asked him about the duchy, its taxation, its debt, its alliances and difficulties, you might mark in the attention he bestowed all the signs of one receiving very valuable information. "You perceive, Princess," said he at last, "Stubber quite agrees with the Duke of Cloudsley. These small states enjoy no real independence." "Then why are they not absorbed into the larger nations about them?" "They have their uses. They are like substances interposed between conflicting bodies, which receive and diminish the shock of collisions. So that Prussia, when wanting to wound Austria, only pinches Baden, and Austria, desirous of insulting Saxony, takes it out on Sigmaringen." "It's a pleasant destiny you assign them," said she, laughing. "Stubber will tell you I'm not far wrong in my appreciation." "I'm not for what they call mediatizing them neither, my lady," said Stubber, who generally used the designation to imply his highest degree of respect. "That may all be very well for the interests of the great states and the balance of power, and all that sort of thing, but we ought also to bestow a thought upon the people of these small countries, especially on the inhabitants of their cities. What's to become of them when you withdraw their courts, and throw their little capitals into the position of provincial towns, and even villages?" They will eke out a livelihood somehow, my dear Stubber. Be assured that they will not starve. Masters of the horse may have to keep livery stables. Chamberlains turn valets. Ladies of the bedchamber descend to the arts of millinery. But, after all, the change will be but in name, and there will not be a whit more slavery in the new condition than in the old one." "Well, I'm not so sure they'll take the same comfortable view of it that you do, Sir Horace," said Stubber. "Nor can I see who can possibly want livery stables, or smart bonnets, or even a fine butler, when the resources of the court are withdrawn, and the city left to its own devices." "Stubber suspects," said Upton, "that the policy which prevails amongst our real landed proprietors against small holdings is that which at present influences the larger states of Europe against small kingdoms, and so far he is right. It is unquestionably the notion of our day that the influences of government require space for their exercise." "If the happiness of the people was to be thought of, which of course it is not," said Stubber, "I'd say leave them as they are." "Ah, my dear Stubber, you are now drawing the question into the realm of the imaginary. What do any of us know about our happiness? Enough to eat and drink, a comfortable roof over you, good clothes, nothing oppressive or unequal in the laws. These go for a good way in the kind of thing I mean. And let me observe, sir, it is a great privilege little states, like little people, enjoy, and they need to have no ambitions. They don't want to conquer anybody. They neither ask for a mouth of a river here, or an island there, and if only let alone, they'll never disturb the peace of the world at large." "My dear Stubber, you are quite proficient at statecraft," said Upton, with the very least superciliousness in the accent. "Well, I don't know, Sir Horace," said the other, modestly; "but as my master's means are about the double of what they were when I entered his service, and as the people pay about 1/6 less in taxes than they used to, mayhap I might say that I have put the saddle on the right part of the back." "Your foreign policy does not seem quite as unobjectionable as your home management. That was an ugly business about that boy you gave up to the Austrians." "Well, there were mistakes on all sides. You yourself, Sir Horace, gave him a false passport. His real name turns out to be Massey. It made an impression on me, for a circumstance that happened when I was a young fellow living as a pad groom with Prince Totskoy. I went over on a lark one day to Capri, and was witness to a wedding there of a young Englishman called Massey." "Were you, then, present at the ceremony?" "Yes, sir, and what's stranger still, I have a voucher for it." "A voucher for it? What do you mean?" "It was my way, sir. There was a great supper for the country people and the servants, and I was there, and I suppose I took too much of that Capri wine. It was new and hot at the time, and I got into a row of some sort, and I beat the deputato for some place or t'other, and got locked up for 3 days, and the priest, a very jolly fellow, gave me under his handwriting a voucher that I had been a witness of the marriage and all the festivities afterwards, just to show my master how everything happened. But the prince never asked me for any explanations, and only said he hoped I had amused myself well, and so I kept my voucher to myself, and I have it at this very hour." "Will you let me see it, Stubber?" "To be sure, sir, you shall have it, if I can lay my hand on it in the course of the day." "Let me beg you will go at once and search for it. It may be of more importance than you know of. Go, my dear Stubber, and look it up." "I'll not lose a moment, since you wish to have it," said Stubber, "and I am sure your ladyship will excuse my abrupt departure." The princess assured him that her own interest in the document was not inferior to that of Sir Horace, and he hastened off to prosecute his search. "Here, then, are all my plans altered at once," exclaimed she, as the door closed after him. "If this paper mean only as much as he asserts, it will be ample proof of marriage, and lead us to the knowledge of all those who were present at it." "Yet we must well reflect on the use we make of it," said Upton. "Glencore is now evidently balancing what course to take, and his chance of recovery grows less each day. He seems to incline more and more to repair the wrong he has done. Should we show on our side the merest semblance of compulsion, I would not answer for him." "So that we have the power, as the last resort, I am content to diplomatize," said the princess. "But you must see him this evening, and press for a decision." He has already asked me to come to him after we return from court. It will be late, but it is the hour at which he likes best to talk. If I see occasion for it, I can allude to what Stubber has told us, but it will be only if driven by necessity to it." "I would act more boldly and more promptly," said she. "And rouse an opposition, perhaps, that already is becoming dormant. No, I know Glencore well, and will deal with him more patiently." "From the Chevalier Stubber, your Excellency," said a servant, presenting a sealed packet, and Sir Horace opened it at once. The envelope contained a small and shabby slip of paper, of which the writing appeared faint and indistinct. It was dated 18 Church of St. Lorenzo, Capri, and went to certify Guglielmo Stubber had been present, on the morning of the 18th of August, at the marriage of the most noble Signor Massy and the Princess de la Tour, having in quality as witness signed the registry thereof, and then went on to state the circumstance of his attendance at the supper, and the event which ensued. It bore the name of the writer at foot, Basilio Nardoni, priest of the aforesaid church and village. "Little is Glencore aware that such an evidence as this is in existence," said Upton. "The conviction that he had his vengeance in his power led him into this insane project. He fancied there was not a flaw in that terrible indictment, and see, here is enough to open the door to truth, and undo every detail of all his plotting. How strange it is that the events of life should so often concur to expose the dark schemes of men's hearts, proof starting up in unthought of places, as though to show how vain was mere subtlety in conflict with the inevitable law of fate." "This Basilio Nardoni is an acquaintance of mine," said the Princess, bent on pursuing another train of thought. "He was chaplain to the Cardinal Caraffa, and frequently brought me communications from his Eminence. He can be found if wanted. It is unlikely, most unlikely, that we shall require him." "If you mean that Lord Glencore will himself make all the amends he can for a gross injury and a fraud, no more is necessary," said she, folding the paper and placing it in her pocket book. "But if anything short of this be intended, then there is no exposure too open, no publicity too wide, to be given to the most cruel wrong the world has ever heard of. Leave me to deal with Glencore. I think I'm about the only one who can treat with him. And now for this dinner at court, for I have changed my mind and mean to go," said the Princess. "It is full time to dress, I believe." "It is almost 6 o'clock," said Upton, starting up. "We have quite forgotten ourselves." End of chapter 50.
Chapter 51 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 51. Conflicting Thoughts. The Princess Sabloukoff found, not by any means an unfrequent experience in life, that the dinner whose dullness she had dreaded turned out a very pleasant affair. The Prince was unusually gracious. He was in good spirits, and put forth powers of agreeability, which had been successful in one of less distinction than himself. He possessed eminently what a great orator once panegyrized as a high conversational element, great variety, and could without abruptness pass from subject to subject, with always what showed he had bestowed thought upon the theme before him. Great people have few more enviable privileges than that they choose their own topics for conversation. Nothing disagreeable, nothing wearisome, nothing inopportune can be intruded upon them. When they have no longer anything worth saying, they can change the subject, or the company. His Highness talked with Madame de Sabloukoff on questions of state as he might have talked with a Metternich. He even invited from her expressions of opinion that were almost counsels, sentiments that might pass for warnings. He ranged over the news of the day, relating occasionally some little anecdote, every actor in which was a celebrity, or now and then communicating some piece of valueless secrecy, told with all the mystery of a great fact, and then he discussed with Upton the condition of England, and deplored, as all continental rulers do, the impending downfall of that kingdom from the growing force of our restless and daring democracy. He regretted much that Sir Horace was still not in office, but consoled himself by reflecting that the pleasure he enjoyed in his society had been in that case denied him. In fact, what with insinuated flatteries, little signs of confidence, and a most marked tone of cordiality, purposely meant to strike beholders, the Prince conducted the conversation right royally, and played Highness to perfection. And these two crafty, keen-sighted people, did they not smile at the performance, and did they not, as they drove home at night, amuse themselves as they recounted the little traits of the great man's dupery? Not a bit of it. They were charmed with his gracious manner, and actually enchanted with his agreeability. Strong in their self-esteem, they could not be brought to suspect that any artifice could be practised on them, or that the mere trickery and tinsel of high station could be imposed on them as true value. Nay, they even went further, and discovered that his Highness was really a very remarkable man, and one who received far less than the estimation due to him. His flightiness became versatility, his eccentricity was all originality, and ere they reached the hotel, they had endowed him with almost every moral and mental quality that can dignify manhood. "It is really a magnificent turquoise," said the Princess, gazing with admiration at a ring the Prince had taken from his own finger to present to her. "How absurd is that English jealousy about foreign decorations! I was obliged to decline the Red Cross of Massa, which his Highness proposed to confer on me. A monarchy that wants to emulate a republic is simply ridiculous. You English are obliged to pay dear for your hypocrisies, and you ought, for you really love them." And with this taunt the carriage stopped at the door of the inn. As Upton passed up the stairs, the waiter handed him a note, which he hastily opened. It was from Glencore, and in these words: "Dear Upton, I can bear this suspense no longer. To remain here canvassing with myself all the doubts that beset me is a torture I cannot endure. I leave therefore at once for Florence. Once there, where I mean to see and hear for myself, I can decide what is to be the fate of the few days or weeks that yet remain to yours, Glencore." "He is gone, then? His lordship has started?" "Yes, your Excellency. He is by this time near Lucca, for he gave orders to have horses ready at all stations." "Read that, madam," said Upton, as he once more found himself alone with the Princess. "You will see that all your plans are disconcerted. He is off to Florence." Madame de Sabloukoff read the note, and threw it carelessly on the table. "He wants to forgive himself, and only hesitates how to do so gracefully," she said sneeringly. "I think you are less than just to him," said Upton, mildly. "He is a noble nature, disfigured by one grand defect." "Your national character, like your language, is so full of incongruities and contradictions, that I am not ashamed to own myself unequal to master it. But it strikes me that both one and the other usurp freedoms that are not permitted to others. At all events, I am rejoiced that he has gone. It is the most wearisome thing in life to negotiate with one too near you. Diplomacy of even the humblest kind requires distance. You agree with the duellist, I perceive," he said, laughing, "that 12 paces is a more fatal distance than across a handkerchief. Proximity begets tremor." "You have guessed my meaning correctly," she said. "Meanwhile, I must write to her not to come here. Shall I say that we will be in Florence in a day or two?" "I was just thinking of those Saravisa springs," said Upton. "They contain a bichloride of potash, which Staub, in his treatise, says is the element wanting in all nervous organizations." "But remember the season. We are in midwinter. The hotels are closed." "The springs are running, Princess. The earth, as Moccus says, is a mother that never ceases to nourish. I do suspect I need a little nursing." The Princess understood him thoroughly. She well knew that whenever the affairs of Europe followed an unbroken track, without anything eventful or interesting, Sir Horace fell back upon his maladies for matter of occupation. She had, however, now occasion for his advice and counsel, and by no means concurred in his plan of spending some days, if not weeks, in the dreary mountain solitudes of Serravezza. "You must certainly consult Zanetti before you venture on these waters," said she. "They are highly dangerous, if taken without the greatest circumspection." And she gave a catalogue of imaginary calamities which had befallen various illustrious and gifted individuals, to which Upton listened with profound attention. "Very well," sighed he, as she finished, "it must be as you say. I'll see Zanetti, for I cannot afford to die just yet. That Greek question will have no solution without me. No one has the key of it but myself. That Pan-Slavic scheme, too, in the Principalities, attracts no notice but mine, and as to Spain, the policy I have devised for that country requires all the watchfulness I can bestow on it. No, Princess," here he gave a melancholy sigh, "we must not die at this moment. There are just 4 men in Europe. I doubt if she could get on with 3. "What proportion do you admit as to the other sex?" she said, laughing. "I only know of 1, madam," and he kissed her hand with gallantry. "And now for Florence, if you will." It is by no means improbable that our readers have a right to an apology at our hands for the habit we have indulged of lingering along with the 2 individuals whose sayings and doings are not directly essential to our tale, but it is not the story of everyday life our guarantee that incidents and people cross and recross the path we are going, attracting our attention, engaging our sympathy, enlisting our energies, even in our most anxious periods? Such is the world, and we cannot venture out of reality. Besides this, we are disposed to think that the moral of a tale is often more effectively conveyed by the characters than by the catastrophe of a story. The strange, discordant tones of the human heart, blending with melody the purest sounds of passionate meaning, are in themselves more powerful lessons than all the records of rewarded virtue and all the calendars of punished vice. The nature of a single man can be far more instructive than the history of every accident that befalls him. It is then with regret that we leave the Princess and Sir Horace to pursue their journey alone. We confess a liking for their society, and would often as soon loiter in the bypaths that they follow as journey in the more recognized high road of our true story. Not having the conviction that our sympathy is shared by our readers, we again return to the fortunes of Glencore. When Lord Glencore's carriage underwent the usual scrutiny exercised towards travellers at the gate of Florence, and prying officials poked their lanterns in every quarter, in all the security of their caste, 2-foot travellers were rudely pushed aside to await the time till the pretentious equipage passed on. They were foreigners, and their effects, which they carried in knapsacks, required examination. "We have come a long way on foot to-day," said the younger, in a tone that indicated nothing of asking a favour. "Can't we have this search made at once?" "Whisht, whisht," whispered his companion in English. "Wait till the Prince moves on, and be polite with them all." "I am seeking for nothing in the shape of compliment," said the other. "There is no reason why, because I am on foot, I must be detained for this man." Again the other remonstrated and suggested patience. "What are you grumbling about, young fellow?" cried one of the officers. "Do you fancy yourself of the same consequence as Milordo? And see, he must wait his time here." "We came a good way on foot to-day, sir," interposed the elder, eagerly taking the reply on himself, "and we're tired and weary, and would be deeply obliged if you'd examine us as soon as you could." "Stand aside and wait your turn," was a stern response. "You almost deserve the fellow's insolence, Billy," said the youth. A crown piece in his hand had been far more intelligible than your appeal to his pity, and he threw himself wearily down on a stone bench. Aroused by the accent of his own language, Lord Glencore sat up in his carriage, and leaned out to catch sight of the speaker, but the shadow of the overhanging roof concealed him from view. "Can't you suffer those 2 poor fellows to move on?" whispered his lordship, as he placed a piece of money in the officer's hand. "They look tired and jaded." "There, thank his Excellency for his kindness to you, and go on your way," muttered the officer to Billy, who, without well understanding the words, drew nigh the window, but the glass was already drawn up. The postilions were once more in their saddles, and away dashed the cumbrous carriage in all the noise and uproar that is deemed the proper tribute to rank. The youth heard that they were free to proceed, with a half-dogged indifference, and throwing his knapsack on his shoulders, moved away. "I asked them if they knew one of her name in the city, and they said no," said the elder. "But they so easily mistake names. How did you call her?" "I said Harley." "La Signora Harley," rejoined the other, "and they were positive she was not here. They never heard of her." "Well, we shall know soon," sighed the youth heavily. "Is this not an inn, Billy?" "Ay, it is, but not one for our purpose. It's like a palace. They told me of the Leon d'Oro as a quiet place, and cheap. I don't care where or what it be, one day and night, here will do all I want. And then for Genoa, Billy, and the sea, and the world beyond the sea," said the youth with an increasing animation. "You shall see what a different fellow I'll be when I throw behind me for ever the traditions of this dreary life here." "I know well the good stuff that's in ye," said the other affectionately. "Ay, but you don't know that I have energy as well as pride," said the other. "There's nothing beyond your reach, if you will only strive to get it," said he again, in the same voice. "You're an arrant flatterer, old boy," cried the youth, throwing his arm around him, "but I would not have you otherwise for the world. There is a happiness even in the self-deception of your praise that I could not deny myself." Thus chatting, they arrived at the humble door of the Leon d'Oro, where they installed themselves for the night. It was a house frequented by couriers and vetturini, and at the common table for this company they now took their places for supper. The Carnival was just drawing to its close, and all the gaieties of that merry season were going forward. Nothing was talked of but the brilliant festivities of the city, the splendid balls of the court, and the magnificent receptions in the houses of the nobility. "The Palazzo del Toro takes the lead of all," said one. "There were upwards of 3,000 masks there this evening, I'm told, and the gardens were just as full as the salons." "She is rich enough to afford it well," cried another. "I counted 20 servants in white and gold liveries on the stairs alone." "Were you there, then?" asked the youth, whom we may at once call by his name of Massey. "Yes, sir, a mask and a domino, such as you see yonder, are passports everywhere for the next 24 hours, and though I'm only a courier, I have been chatting with duchesses, and exchanging smart sayings with countesses, in almost every great house in Florence this evening. The Pergola Theatre, too, is open, and all the boxes crowded with visitors." "You are a stranger, as I detect by your accent," said another, "and you ought to have a look at a scene such as you'll never witness in your own land." "What would come of such freedom with us, Billy?" whispered Massey. "Would our great lords tolerate, even for a few hours, the association with honest fellows of this stamp?" "There would be danger in the attempt, anyhow," said Billy. "What calumnies would be circulated, what slanderous tales would be sent abroad, under cover of this secrecy! How many a coward stab would be given in the shadow of that immunity! For one who would use the privilege for mere amusement, how many would turn it to account for private vengeance?" "Are you quite certain such accidents do not occur here?" "That society tolerates the custom is the best answer to this. There may be, for aught we know, many a cruel vengeance executed under favour of this secrecy. Many may cover their faces to unmask their hearts, but after all they continue to observe a habit which centuries back their forefathers followed, and the inference fairly is that it is not baneful. For my own part, I am glad to have an opportunity of witnessing these Saturnalia, and tomorrow I'll buy a mask and a domino, Billy, and so shall you too. Why should we not have a day's fooling like the rest?" Billy shook his head and laughed, and they soon afterwards parted for the night. While young Massey slept soundly, not a dream disturbing the calmness of his rest, Lord Glencore passed the night in a state of feverish excitement, led on by some strange mysterious influence which he could as little account for as resist. He had come back to the city where the fatal incident of his life had occurred. With what purpose he could not tell. It was not indeed that he had no object in view, it was rather that he had so many and conflicting ones that they marred and destroyed each other. No longer under the guidance of calm reason, his head wandered from the past to the present and the future, disturbed by passion and excited by injured self-love. At one moment sentiments of sorrow and shame would take the ascendant, and at the next a vindictive desire to follow out his vengeance and witness the ruin that he had accomplished. The unbroken, unrelieved pressure of one thought, for years and years of time, had at last undermined his reasoning powers, and every attempt at calm judgment or reflection was sure to be attended with some violent paroxysm of irrepressible rage. There are men in whom the combative element is so strong that it usurps all their guidance, and when once they are enlisted in a contest, they cannot desist till the struggle is decided for or against them. Such was Glencore. To discover that the terrible injury he had inflicted on his wife had not crushed her, nor driven her with shame from the world, aroused once more all the vindictive passions of his nature. It was a defiance he could not understand. Guilty or innocent, it mattered not. She had braved him, at least so he was told, and as such he had come to see her with his own eyes. If this was the thought which predominated in his mind, others there that had their passing power over him, moments of tenderness, moments in which the long past came back again, full of softening memories, and then he would burst into tears and cry bitterly. If he ventured to project any plan for reconciliation with her he had so cruelly wronged, he as suddenly bethought him that her spirit was not less high and haughty than his own. She had, so far as he could learn, never quailed before his vengeance. How then might he suppose would she act in the presence of his avowed injustice? Was it not, besides, too late to repair the wrong, even for his boy's sake? Would it not be better if he inherited sufficient means to support an honourable life, unknown and unnoticed, than bequeath to him a name so associated with shame and sorrow? Who can tell, he would cry aloud, what my harsh treatment may not have made him? What resentment may have taken root in his young heart? What distrust may have eaten into his nature? If I could but see him, and talk with him as a stranger, if I could be able to judge him, apart from the influences that my own feelings would create, even then, what would it avail me? I have so sullied and tarnished a proud name, that he could never bear it without reproach. Who is this Lord Glencore? People would say. What is the strange story of his birth? Has any one yet got at the truth? Was the father the cruel tyrant, or the mother the worthless creature we hear tell of? Is he even legitimate? And, if so, why does he walk apart from his equals, and live without recognition by his order? This is the noble heritage I am to leave him. This is the proud position to which he is to succeed. And yet Upton says that the boy's rights are inalienable, that, think how I may, do what I will, the day on which I die, he is the rightful Lord Glencore. His claim may lie dormant, the proofs may be buried, but that, in truth and fact, he will be what all my subterfuge and all my falsehood cannot deny him. And then, if the day should come that he asserts his right, if by some of those wonderful accidents that reveal the mysteries of the world, he should succeed to prove his claim, what a memory will he cherish of me! Will not every sorrow of his youth, every indignity of his manhood be associated with my name? Will he, or can he ever forgive him who defamed the mother and despoiled the son? In the terrible conflict of such thoughts as these he passed the night, intervals of violent grief or passion alone breaking the sad connection of such reflections, till at length the worn-out faculties, incapable of further exercise, wandered away into incoherency, and he raved in all the wildness of insanity. It was thus that Upton found him upon his arrival. End of Chapter 51. Recording by Linda Fredericks, Modesto, California, August 2012. Chapter 52 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 52. Major Scaresby's Visit. Down the crowded thoroughfare of the Borgo d'Ognissanti, the tide of Carnival mummers poured unceasingly. Hideous masks and gay dominoes, ludicrous impersonations, and absurd satires on costume abounded, and the entire population seemed to have given themselves up to merriment, and were fooling it to the top of their bent. Bands of music and chorus singers from the theatre filled the air with their loud strains, and carriages crowded with fantastic figures moved past, pelting the bystanders with mock sweetmeats, and covering them with showers of flour. It was a season of universal license, and, short of actual outrage, all was permitted for the time. Nor did the enjoyment of the scene seem to be confined to the poorer classes of the people, who thus for the nonce assumed equality with their richer neighbours, but all, even to the very highest, mixed in the wild excitement of the pageant, and took the rough treatment they met with in perfect good humour. Dukes and princes, white from head to foot with the snowy shower, went laughingly along, and grave dignitaries were fain to walk arm in arm with the most ludicrous monstrosities, whose gestures turned on them the laughter of all around. Occasionally, but it must be owned rarely, some philosopher of a sterner school might be seen passing hurriedly along, his severe features and contemptuous glances owning to little sympathy with the mummery about him. But even he had to compromise his proud disdain, and escape, as best he might, from the indiscriminate justice of the crowd. To detect one of this stamp, to follow and turn upon him the full tide of popular fury, seemed to be the greatest triumph of the scene. When such a victim presented himself, all joined in the pursuit. Nuns embraced, devils environed him, angels perched on his shoulders, mock wild boars rushed between his legs, his hat was decorated with feathers, his clothes inundated with showers of meal or flour, hackney coachmen dressed as ladies fainted in his arms, and semi-naked bacchanals pressed drink to his lips. In a word, each contributed what he might of attention to the luckless individual, whose resistance, if he were so impolitic as to make any, only increased the zest of the persecution. An instance of this kind had now attracted general attention, nor was the amusement diminished by the discovery that he was a foreigner and an Englishman. Impertinent allusions to his nation, absurd attempts at his language, ludicrous travesties of what were supposed to be his native customs, were showered on him, in company with a hailstorm of mock bonbons and lime pellets, till, covered with powder, and outraged beyond all endurance, he fought his way into the entrance of the Hôtel d'Italie, followed by the cries and laughter of the populace. "Cursed tomfoolery! Confounded asses!" cried he, as he found himself in a harbour of refuge. "What the devil fun can they discover in making each other dirtier than their daily habits bespeak them? I say," cried he, addressing a waiter, "is Sir Horace Upton staying here? Well, will you say Major Scaresby? Be correct in the name. Major Scaresby requests to pay his respects." "His Excellency will see you, sir," said the man, returning quickly with a reply. From the end of a room, so darkened by closed shutters and curtains as to make all approach difficult, a weak voice called out, "Ah, Scaresby, how d'ye do? I was just thinking to myself that I couldn't be in Florence, since I had not seen you." "You are too good, too kind, Sir Horace, to say so," said the other, with a voice whose tones by no means corresponded with the words. "Yes, Scaresby, everything in this good city is in a manner associated with your name, its intrigues, its quarrels, its loves and jealousies, its mysteries, in fine, have had no such interpreter as yourself within the memory of man. What a pity there were no Scaresbys in the Cinquecento! How sad there were none of your family here in the Medicean period! What a picture might we have had of a society fuller even than the present of moral delinquencies!" There was a degree of pomposity in the manner he uttered this that served to conceal in a great measure its sarcasm. "I am much flattered to learn that I have ever enlightened your Excellency on any subject," said the Major dryly. "That you have, Scaresby. I was a mere dabbler in moral toxicology when I heard your first lecture, and I assure you I was struck by your knowledge. And how is the dear city doing?" "It is masquerading to day," said Scaresby, "and consequently far more natural than at any other period of the whole year. Smeared faces and dirty finery, exactly its suitable wear." "Who are here, Major? Anyone that knows?" "Old Millington is here." "The Marquis?" "Yes, he's here, fresh painted and lacquered, his eyes twinkling with a mock lustre that makes him look like an old postchaise with a pair of new lamps." "Ha, ha, ha!" laughed Sir Horace encouragingly. "And then there's Mabworth." "Sir Paul Mabworth?" "Ay, the same old bore as ever. He has got off one of Burke's speeches on the India Bill by heart, and says that he spoke it on the question of the grant for Maynooth. Oh, if poor Burke could only look up!" "Look down, you ought to say, Scaresby. Depend upon it, he's not on the opposition benches still." "I hate the fellow," said Scaresby, whose ill temper was always augmented by any attempted smartness of those he conversed with. "He has taken Walmsley's cook away from him, and never gives any one a dinner." "That is shameful! A perfect dog in the manger." "Worse, he's a dog without any manger, for he keeps his house on board wages, and there's literally nothing to eat. That poor thing, Strejowsky." "Oh, Olga Strejowsky, do you mean? What of her?" "Why, there's another husband just turned up. They thought he was killed in the Caucasus, but he was only passing a few years in Siberia, and so he has come back and claims all the emeralds. You remember, of course, that famous necklace, and the great drops? They belonged once to the Empress Catherine, but Mabworth says that he took the concern with all its dependencies. He'll give up his bargain, but make no compromise." "She's growing old, I fancy." "She's younger than the Sabloukoff by good 5 years, and they tell me she plays beauty to this hour." "Ah, Scaresby, had you known what words were these you have just uttered, or had you only seen the face of him who heard them, you had rather bitten your tongue off than suffered it to fashion them." "Brignolles danced with her at the celebrated fête given by the Prince of Orleans something like 38 years ago." "And how is the dear Duke?" asked Upton, sharply. "Just as you saw him at the court of Louis XVIII. He swaggers a little more as he gets more feeble about the legs, and he shows his teeth when he laughs, more decidedly since his last journey to Paris. Devilish clever fellows these modern dentists are. He wants to marry. I suppose you've heard it?" "Not a word of it. Who is the happy fair?" "The Nina, as they call her now. She was one of the Deleatourists who married, or didn't marry, Glencore. Don't you remember him? He was the colonel of the 11th, and a devil of the martinet he was." "I remember him," said Upton, dryly. "Well, he ran off with one of those girls, and some say they were married at Capri, as if it signified what happened at Capri. She was a deuced good looking girl at the time, a coquette, you know, and Glencore was one of those stiff English fellows that think every man is making up to his wife. He drank besides." "No, pardon me, there you are mistaken. I knew him intimately. Glencore was as temperate as myself." "I have it from Lowther, who used to take him home at night. He said Glencore never went to bed sober. At all events, she hated him, and detested his miserly habits." "Another mistake, my dear Major. Glencore was never what is called a rich man, but he was always a generous one." "I suppose you'll not deny that he used to thrash her? Ay, and with a horsewhip too." "Come, come, Scaresby, This is really too coarse for mere jesting." "Jest? By Jove, it was very bitter earnest. She told Brignoles all about it. I'm not sure she didn't show him the marks." "Take my word for it, Scaresby," said Upton, dropping his voice to a low but measured tone, "this is a base calumny, and the Duke of Brignoles no more circulated such a story than I did. He is a man of honour, and utterly incapable of it." "I can only repeat that I believe it to be perfectly true," said Scaresby calmly. "Nobody here ever doubted the story." "I cannot say what measure of charity accompanies your zeal for truth in this amiable society, Scaresby, but I can repeat my assertion that this must be a falsehood." "You will find it very hard, nevertheless, to bring anyone over to your opinion," retorted the unappeasable Major. "He was a fellow everybody hated, proud and supercilious to all, and treated his wife's relations, who were of far better blood than himself, as though they were canaille." A loud crash, as if of something heavy having fallen, here interrupted their colloquy, and Upton sprang from his seat and hastened into the adjoining room. Close beside the door, so close that he almost fell over it in entering, lay the figure of Lord Glencore. In his efforts to reach the door he had fainted, and there he lay, a cold clammy sweat covering his livid features, and his bloodless lips slightly parted. It was almost an hour ere his consciousness returned, but when it did, and he saw Upton alone at his bedside, he pressed his hand within his own, and said, "I heard it all, Upton, every word. I tried to reach the room. I got out of bed, and was already at the door, when my brain reeled, and my heart grew faint. It may have been malady, it might be passion, I know not, but I saw no more." "He is gone, is he not?" cried he, in a faint whisper. "Yes, yes, an hour ago; but you will think nothing of what he said when I tell you his name. It was Scaresby, Major Scaresby, one whose bad tongue is the one solitary claim by which he subsists in a society of slanderers." "And he is gone," repeated the other, in a tone of deep despondency. "Of course he is. I never saw him since, but be assured of what I have just told you, that his libels carry no reproach. He is a calumniator by temperament." "I'd have shot him if I could have opened the door," muttered Glencore between his teeth, but Upton heard the words distinctly. "What am I to this man," cried he aloud, "or he to me, that I am to be arraigned by him on charges of any kind, true or false? What accident of fortune makes him my judge? Tell me that, sir. Who has appealed to him for protection? Who has demanded to be righted at his hand?" "Will you not hear me, Glencore, when I say that his slanders have no sting? In the circles wherein he mixes, it is the mere scandal that amuses. For its veracity, there is not one that cares. You or I, or someone else, supply the name of an actor in a disreputable drama, the plot of which alone interests, not the performer." "And am I to sit tamely down under this degradation?" exclaimed Glencore, passionately. "I have never subscribed to this dictation. There is little, indeed, of life left to me, but there is enough, perhaps, to vindicate myself against men of this stamp. You shall take him a message from me. You shall tell him by what accident I overheard his discoveries." "My dear Glencore, there are graver interests, far worthier cares, than any this man's name can enter into, which should now engage you." "I say he shall have my provocation, and that within an hour," cried Glencore, wildly. "You would give this man and his words a consequence that neither have ever possessed," said Upton, in a mild and subdued tone. "Remember, Glencore, that I left with you this morning that paper of Stubber's, which was with a distinct understanding that other and wiser thoughts than those of vengeance were to occupy your attention. I never scrupled to place it in your hands. I never hesitated about confiding to you what in a lawyer's phrase would be a proof against you. When an act of justice was to be done, I would not stain it by the faintest shadow of coercion. I left you free. I leave you still free from everything but the dictates of your own honour." Glencore made no reply, but the conflict of his thoughts seemed to agitate him greatly. "The man who has pursued a false path in life," said Upton, calmly, "has need of much courage to retrace his steps. But courage is not the quality you fail in, Glencore, so that I appeal to you with confidence." "I have need of courage," muttered Glencore. "You say truly. What was it the doctor said this morning? Aneurism?" Upton moved his head with an inclination barely perceptible. "What a nemesis there is in nature," said Glencore, with a sickly attempt to smile, "that passion should beget malady. I never knew, physically speaking, that I had a heart, till it was broken. So that," resumed he, in a more agreeable tone, "death may ensue at any moment, on the least excitement?" "He warned you gravely on that point," said Upton, cautiously. "How strange that I should have come through that trial of an hour ago! It was not that the struggle did not move me. I could have torn that fellow limb from limb, Upton, if I had but the strength. But see," cried he, feebly, "what a poor wretch I am! I cannot close these fingers," and he held out a worn and clammy hand as he spoke. "Do with me as you will," said he, after a pause. "I ought to have followed your counsels long ago." Upton was too subtle an anatomist of human motives to venture by even the slightest word to disturb a train of thought which any interference could only damage. As the other still continued to meditate, and by his manner and look in a calmer and more reflective spirit, the wily diplomatist moved noiselessly away, and left him alone. Chapter 52. Recording by Linda Fredericks, Modesto, California, September 2012.
Chapter 53 of The Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 53. A Masque in Carnival Time. From the gorgeous halls of the Pitti Palace down to the humblest chamber in Camaldole, Florence was a scene of rejoicing. As night closed in, the crowds seemed only to increase, and the din and clamour to grow louder. It seemed as though festivity and joy had overflowed from the houses, filling the streets with merrymakers. In the clear, cold air, groups feasted, and sang, and danced, all mingling and intermixing with a freedom that showed how thoroughly the spirit of pleasure-seeking can annihilate the distinctions of class. The soiled and tattered mummer leaned over the carriage door, and exchanged compliments with the masked duchess within. The titled noble of a dozen quarterings stopped to pledge a merry company, who pressed him to drain a glass of Montepulciano with them. There was a perfect fellowship between those whom fortune had so widely separated, and the polished accents of high society were heard to blend with the quaint and racy expressions of "the people." Theatres and palaces lay open, all lighted a giorno. The whole population of the city surged and swayed to and fro, like a mighty sea in motion, making the air resound the while with a wild mixture of sounds, wherein music and laughter were blended. Amid the orgy, however, not an act, not a word of rudeness disturbed the general content. It was a season of universal joy, and none dared to destroy the spell of pleasure that presided. Our task is not to follow the princely equipage as they roll in unceasing tides with the marble courts, nor yet to track the strong flood that poured through the wide thoroughfares in all the wildest exuberance of their joy. Our business is with two travellers who, well weary of being for hours afoot, and partly sated with pleasure, sat down to rest themselves on a bench beside the Arno. "It's a glorious fooling, that must be owned, Billy," said Charles Massey, "and the spirit is most contagious. How little have you or I in common with these people! We scarce can catch the accents of the droll allusions, we cannot follow the strains of their rude songs, and yet we are carried away like the rest to feel a wild enjoyment in all this din and glitter and movement. How well they do it, too!" "That's all by raison of concentration," said Billy, gravely. "They are highly charged with fun. The old adage says, non semper sunt Saturnalia. It is not every day Morris kills a cow. Yet it is by this very habit of enjoyment that they know how to be happy." "To be sure it is," cried Billy. "They have a ritual for it, which we haven't. As Cicero tells us, in jucundis nullum periculum. But ye see we have no notion of any amusement without a dash of danger through it, if not even cruelty. The French know how to reconcile the two natures. They are brave and light-hearted, too." "And the Irish, Mr. Charles, the Irish especially," said Billy, proudly, "for I was alluding to the English in what I said last. The versatile ingenium is all our own. He goes into a tent and he spends half-a-crown, comes out, meets a friend, and for love knocks him down. There's an elegant philosophy in that now, that a Saxon would never see, for it is out of the very fulness of the heart, ye may remark, that Pat does this, just as much as to say, I don't care for the expense. He smashes a skull just as he would a whole dresser of crockery-ware. There's something very grand in that recklessness." The tone of the remark, and a certain wild energy of his manner, showed that poor Billy's faculties were slightly under the influences of the Tuscan grape, and the youth smiled at sight of an excess so rare. "How hard it must be," said Massey, "to go back to the workaday routine of life after one of these outbursts. To resume not alone the drudgery, but all the slavish observances that humble men yield to great ones. 'Tis what Bacon says, there's nothing so hard as unlearning anything, and the proof is how few of us ever do it. We always go on musing old thoughts with new, putting different kinds of wine into the same glass, and then wondering we are not invigorated." "You're in a mood for moralizing to-night, I see, Billy," said the other, smiling. "The levities of life always put me on that thrack, just as too bright a day reminds me to take out an umbrella with me." "Yet I do not see that all your observation of the world has indisposed you to enjoy it, or that you take harsher views of life the closer you look at it. Quite the reverse. The more I see of mankind, the more I'm struck with the fact that the very wickedest and worst can't get rid of remorse. 'Tis something out of a man's nature entirely, something that dwells outside of him, sets him on to commit a crime, and then he begins to reason and dispute with the temptation, just like one keeping bad company, and listening to impure notions and evil suggestions day after day. As he does this, he gets to have a taste for that kind of low society, I mean with his own bad thoughts, till at last every other ceases to amuse him. Look, what's that there, where they are going with all the torches there?" cried he, suddenly, springing up and pointing to a dense crowd that passed along the street. It was a band of music, dressed in a quaint mediaeval costume, on its way to serenade some palace. "Let us follow and listen to them, Billy," said the youth, and they arose and joined the throng. Following in the wake of the dense mass, they at last reached the gates of a great palace, and after some waiting gained access to the spacious courtyard. The grim old statues and armorial bearings shone in the glare of 100 torches, and the deep echoes rang with the brazen voices of the band as, pent up within the quadrangle, the din of a large orchestra arose. On a great terrace overhead numerous figures were grouped, indistinctly seen from the light of the salons within, but whose mysterious movements completed the charm of a very interesting picture. Some wrapped in shawls, to shroud them from the night air, some, less cautiously emerging from the rooms within, leaned over the marble balustrade and showed their jewelled arms in the dim hazy light, while around and about them gay uniforms and costumes abounded. As Billy gave himself up to the excitement of the music, young Massy, more interested by the aspect of the scene, gazed unceasingly at the balcony. There was just that shadowy indistinctness in the whole that invested it with a kind of romantic interest, and he could weave stories and incidents from those whose figures passed and repassed before him. He fancied that in their gestures he could trace many meanings, and as the bent-down heads approached, and their hands touched, he fashioned many a tale in his own mind of moving fortunes. "And see, she comes again to that same dark angle of the terrace," muttered he to himself as, shrouded in a large mantle, and with a half-mask on her features, a tall and graceful figure passed into the place he spoke of. "She looks like one among, but not of them. How much of heart-weariness is there in that attitude! How full is it of sad and tender melancholy! Would that I could see her face! My life on't that it is beautiful! There, she is tearing up her bouquet. Leaf by leaf the rose-leaves are falling, as though one by one hopes are decaying in her heart." He pushed his way through the dense throng till he gained a corner of the court where a few leaves and flower-stems yet strewed the ground. Carefully gathering up these, he crushed them in his hand, and seemed to feel as though a nearer tie bound him to the fair unknown. How little ministers to the hope, how infinitely less again will feed the imagination of a young heart! Between them now there was, to his appreciation, some mysterious link. "Yes," he said to himself, "true, I stand unknown, unnoticed. Yet it is to me, of all the thousands here, she could reveal what is passing in that heart. I know it, I feel it. She has a sorrow whose burden I might help to bear. There is cruelty, or treachery, or falsehood arrayed against her, and through all the splendor of the scene, all the wild gaiety of the orgy, some spectral image never leaves her side. I would stake existence on it that I have read her aright. Of all the intoxications that can entrance the human faculties, there is none so maddening as that produced by giving full sway to an exuberant imagination. The bewilderment resists every effort of reason, and in its onward course carries away its victims with all the force of a mountain torrent. A winding stair, long unused and partly dilapidated, led to the end of the terrace where she stood, and Massy, yielding to some strange impulse, slowly and noiselessly crept up this till he gained a spot only a few yards removed from her. The dark shadow of the building almost completely concealed his figure, and left him free to contemplate her unnoticed. Some event of interest within had withdrawn all from the terrace save herself. The whole balcony was suddenly deserted, and she alone remained, to all seeming lost to the scene around her. It was then that she removed her mask, and suffering it to fall back on her neck, rested her head pensively on her hand. Massy bent over eagerly to try and catch sight of her face. The effort he made startled her. She looked round, and he cried out, "Ida! Ida! My heart could not deceive me." In another instant he had climbed the balcony and was beside her. "I thought we had parted for ever, Sebastian," said she. "You told me so on the last night at Massa." "And so I meant when I said it," cried he. "Nor is our meeting now of my planning. I came to Florence, it is true, to see, but not to speak with you, ere I left Europe for ever. For 3 entire days I have searched the city to discover where you lived, and chance, I have no better name for it, chance has led me hither." "It is an unkind fortune that has made us meet again," said she, in a voice of deep melancholy. "I have never known fortune in any other mood," said he, fiercely. When clouds show me the edge of their silver linings, I only prepare myself for storm and hurricane." "I know you have endured much," said she, in a voice of deeper sadness. "You know but little of what I have endured," rejoined he, sternly. "You saw me taunted, indeed, with my humble calling, insulted for my low birth, expelled ignominiously from a house where my presence had been sought for, and yet all these, grievous enough, are little to other evils I have had to bear." "By what unhappy accident, what mischance have you made her your enemy, Sebastian? She would not even suffer me to speak to you. She went so far as to tell me that there was a reason for the dislike, one which, if she could reveal, I would never question." "How can I tell?" cried he, angrily. "I was born, I suppose, under an evil star, for nothing prospers with me." "But can you even guess her reasons?" said she, eagerly. "No, except it be the presumption of one in my condition daring to aspire to one in yours, and that, as the world goes, would be reason enough. It is probable, too, that I did not state these pretensions of mine over delicately. I told her, with a frankness that was not quite acceptable, I was one who could not speak of birth or blood. She did not like the coarse word I applied to myself, and I will not repeat it, and she ventured to suggest that, had there not appeared some ambiguity in her own position, I could never have so far forgotten mine as to advance such pretensions." "Well, and then?" cried the girl, eagerly. "Well, and then," said he, deliberately, "I told her I had heard rumours of the kind she alluded to, but to me they carried no significance, that it was for you I cared. The accidents of life around you had no influence on my choice. You might be all that the greatest wealth and highest blood could make you, or as poor and ignoble as myself, without any change in my affections. These," said she, "are the insulting promptings of that English breeding which you say has mixed with your blood, and if for no other cause would make me distrust you." "Stained as it may be," said I, "that same English blood is the best pride I possess." She grew pale with passion as I said this, but never spoke a word, and there we stood staring haughtily at each other till she pointed to the door, and so I left her. And now, Ida, who is she that treats me thus disdainfully? I ask you not in anger, for I know too well how the world regards such as me to presume to question its harsh injustice. But tell me, I beseech you, that she is one to whose station these prejudices are the fitting accompaniments, and let me feel that it is less myself as the individual that she wrongs, than the class I belong to is that which she despises. I can better bear this contumely when I know that it is an instinct." "If birth and blood can justify a prejudice, a princess of the house of Digliatore might claim the privilege," said the girl, haughtily. "No family of the north, at least, will dispute with our own in lineage. But there are other causes which may warrant all that she feels toward you even more strongly, Sebastian. This boast of your English origin, this it is which has doubtless injured you in her esteem. Too much reason has she had to cherish the antipathy. Betrayed into a secret marriage by an Englishman who represented himself as of a race noble as her own, she was deserted and abandoned by him afterwards. This is a terrible mystery which I never dared to tell you, and which has led us to a life of seclusion in Massa. This is the source of that hatred towards all of a nation which she must ever associate with the greatest misfortunes of her life. And from this unhappy event was she led to make me that solemn oath that I spoke of, never to link my fortunes with one of that hated land." "But you told me that you had not made the pledge," said he, wildly. "Nor had I then, Sebastian. But since we last met, worked on by solicitation, I could not resist. Tortured by a narrative of such sorrows as I never listened to before, I yielded, and gave my promise." "It matters little to me," said he, gloomily. "A barrier the more or less can be of slight moment when there rolls a wide sea between us. Had you ever loved me, such a pledge had been impossible." "It was you yourself, Sebastian, told me we were never to meet again," rejoined she. "Better that we had never done so," muttered he. "Nay, perhaps I am wrong," added he fiercely. "This meeting may serve to mark how little there ever was between us. Is this cruelty affected, Sebastian, or is it real? It cannot be cruel to echo your own words. Besides," said he, with an air of mockery in the words, "she who lives in this gorgeous palace, surrounded with all the splendours of life, can have little complaint to make against the cruelty of fortune." "How unlike yourself is all this!" cried she. "You, of all I have ever seen or known, understood how to rise above the accidents of fate, placing your happiness and your ambitions in a sphere where mere questions of wealth never entered. What can have so changed you?" Before he could reply, a sudden movement in the crowd beneath attracted the attention of both, and a number of persons who had filled the terrace now passed hurriedly into the salons, where, to judge from the commotion, an event of some importance had occurred. Ida lost not a moment in entering, when she was met by the words, "It is she! Nina herself is ill. Some mask, a stranger, it would seem, has said something or threatened something." In fact, she had been carried to her room in strong convulsions, and while some were in search of medical aid for her, others, not less eagerly, were endeavouring to detect the delinquent. From the gay and brilliant picture of festivity which was presented but a few minutes back, what a change now came over the scene! Many hurried away at once, shocked at even a momentary shadow on the sunny road of their existence. Others as anxiously pressed on to recount the incident elsewhere. Some again, moved by curiosity, or some better prompting, exerted themselves to investigate what amounted to a gross violation of the etiquette of a carnival. And thus, in the salons, on the stairs, and in the court itself, the greatest bustle and confusion prevailed. At length some suggested that the gate of the palace should be closed, and none suffered to depart without unmasking. The motion was at once adopted, and a small knot of persons, the friends of the Countess, assumed the task of the scrutiny. Despite complaints and remonstrances as to the inconvenience and delay thus occasioned, they examined every carriage as it passed out. None, however, but faces familiar to the Florentine world were to be met with. The well-known of every ball and fête were there, and if a stranger presented himself, he was sure to be one for whom some acquaintance could bear testimony. At a fire in one of the smaller salons stood a small group, of which the Duc de Brignolles and Major Scaresby formed a part. Sentiments of a very different order had detained these two individuals, and while the former was deeply moved by the insult offered to the Countess, the latter felt an intense desire to probe the circumstance to the bottom. "Devilish odd it is," cried Scaresby. "Here we have been this last hour and a half turning a whole house out of the windows, and yet there's no one to tell us what it's all about." "Pardon, monsieur," said the Duke severely. "We know that a lady whose hospitality we have been accepting has retired from her company insulted. It is very clearly our duty that this should not pass unpunished. Oughtn't we to have some clearer insight into what constituted the insult? It may have been a practical joke, a mauvaise plaisanterie, Duke." "We have no claim to the confidence not extended to us, sir," said the Frenchman. "To me it is quite sufficient that the Countess feels aggrieved. Not but we shall cut an absurd figure to morrow, when we own that we don't know what we were so indignant about. Only so many of us have characters for the latest intelligence." To this sally there succeeded a somewhat awkward pause, Scaresby occupying himself with thoughts of some perfectly safe vengeance. "I shouldn't wonder if it was that Count Marsano, that fellow who used to be about the Nina long ago, come back again. He was at Como this summer, and made many inquiries after his old love." A most insulting stare of defiance was the only reply the old Duke could make to what he would have been delighted to resent as a personal affront. "Marsano is a mauvais drôle," said a Russian. "If a woman slighted him, or he suspected that she did, he's the very man to execute a vengeance of the kind." "I should apply a harsher epithet to a man capable of such conduct," said the Duke. "He'd not take it patiently, Duke," said the other. "It is precisely in that hope, sir, that I should employ it," said the Duke. Again was the conversation assuming a critical turn, and again an interval of ominous silence succeeded. "There is but one carriage now in the court, your Excellency," said the servant, addressing the Duke in a low voice, "and the gentleman inside appears to be seriously ill. It might be better, perhaps, not to detain him." "Of course not," said the Duke. "But stay, I will go down myself." There was still a considerable number of persons on foot in the court when the Duke descended, but only one equipage remained, a hired carriage, at the open door of which a servant was standing holding a glass of water for his master. "Can I be of any use to your master?" said the Duke, approaching. "Is he ill?" "I fear he has burst a blood vessel, sir," said the man. "He is too weak to answer me." "Who is it? What's his name?" "I am not able to tell you, sir. I only accompanied him from the hotel." "Let us have a doctor at once. He appears to be dying," said the Duke, as he placed his fingers on the sick man's wrist. "Let some one go for a physician." "There is one here," cried a voice. "I'm a doctor," and Billy Traynor pushed his way to the spot. "Come, Master Charles, get into the coach and help me to lift him out." Young Massy obeyed, and not without difficulty they succeeded at last in disengaging the almost lifeless form of a man whose dark domino was perfectly saturated with fresh blood. His half mask still covered his face, and, to screen his features from the vulgar gaze of the crowd, they suffered it to remain there. Up the wide stairs and into a spacious salon they now carried the figure, whose drooping head and hanging limbs gave little signs of life. They placed him on a sofa, and Traynor, with a ready hand, untied the mask and removed it. "Merciful heavens!" cried he. "It's my lord himself!" The youth bent down, gazed for a few seconds at the corpse-like face, and fell fainting to the floor. "My Lord Glencore himself!" said the Duke, who was himself an old and attached friend. "Hush! Not a word!" whispered Traynor. "He's rallying. He's coming to. Don't utter a syllable." Slowly and languidly the dying man raised his eyelids, and gazed at each of those around him. From their faces he turned his gaze to the chamber, viewing the walls and the ceiling all in turn, and then, in an accent barely audible, he said, "Where am I?" "Amongst friends, who love and will cherish you, dear Glencore," said the Duke affectionately. "Ah, Brignol, I remember you. And this—who is this?" "Traynor, my lord, Billy Traynor, that will never leave you while he can serve you." "Whose tears are those upon my hand? I feel them hot and burning," said the sick man, and Billy stepped back, that the light should fall upon the figure that knelt beside him. "Don't cry, poor fellow," said Glencore. "It must be a hard world, or you have many better and dearer friends than I could have ever been to you. Who is this?" Billy tried, but could not answer. "Tell him, if you know who it is. See how wild and excited it has made him," cried the Duke, for, stretching out both hands, Glencore had caught the boy's face on either side, and continued to gaze on it in wild eagerness. "It is! It is!" cried he, pressing it to his bosom, and kissing the forehead over and over again. "Whom does he fancy it? Whom does he suspect?" "This is—look, Brignol!" cried the dying man, in a voice already thick with the death rattle. "This is the 7th Lord Viscount Glencore. I declare it. And now—" He fell back, and never spoke more. A single shudder shook his feeble frame, and he was dead. We have had occasion once before in this veracious history to speak of the polite oblivion Florentine society so well understands to throw over the course of events which might cloud, even for a moment, the sunny surface of its enjoyment. No people, so far as we know, have greater gifts in this way. To shroud the disagreeables of life in decent shadow, to ignore or forget them, is their grand prerogative. Scarcely, therefore, had 3 weeks elapsed than the terrible catastrophe at the Palazzo della Torre was totally consigned to the bygones. It ceased to be thought of, spoken of, and was as much matter of remote history as an incident in the times of one of the Medici. Too much interested in the future to waste time on the past, they launched into speculations as to whether the Countess would be likely to marry again, what change the late event might effect in the amount of her fortune, and how far her position in the world might be altered by the incident. He who, in the ordinary esteem of society, would have felt less acutely than his neighbours for Glencore's sad fate, Upton, was in reality deeply and sincerely affected. The traits which make a consummate man of the world, one whose prerogative it is to appreciate others, and be able to guide and influence their actions, are, in truth, very high and rare gifts, and imply resources of fine sentiment as fully as stores of intellectual wealth. Upton sorrowed over Glencore as for one whose noble nature had been poisoned by an impetuous temper, and over whose best instincts an ungovernable self-esteem had ever held the mastery. They had been friends almost from boyhood, and the very worldliest of men can feel the bitterness of that insulation in which the turn of life too frequently commences. Such friendships are never made in later life. We lend our affections when young on very small security, and though it is true we are occasionally unfortunate, we do now and then make a safe investment. No men are more prone to attach an exaggerated value to early friendships than those who, stirred by strong ambitions, and animated by high resolves, have played to the great stakes in the world's lottery. Too much immersed in the cares and contests of life to find time to contract close personal attachments, they fall back upon the memory of school or college days to supply the want of their hearts. There is a sophistry, too, that seduces them to believe that then, at least, they were loved for what they were, for qualities of their nature, not for accidents of station, or the proud rewards of success. There is also another and a very strange element in the pleasure such memories afford. Our early attachments serve as points of departure by which we measure the distance we have travelled in life. Ay, say we were schoolfellows. I remember how he took the lead of me in this or that science, how far behind he left me in such a thing, and yet look at us now. Upton had very often to fall back upon similar recollections. Neither his school nor his college life had been remarkable for distinction, but it was always perceived that every attainment he achieved was such as would be available in after life. Nor did he ever burden himself with the toils of scholarship, while there lay within his reach stores of knowledge that might serve to contest the higher and greater prizes that he had already set before his ambition. But let us return to himself as, alone and sorrow-struck, he sat in his room at the Hôtel d'Italie. Various cares and duties consequent on Glencore's death had devolved entirely upon him. Young Massy had suddenly disappeared from Florence on the morning after the funeral, and was seen no more, and Upton was the only one who could discharge any of the necessary duties of such a moment. The very nature of the task thus imposed upon him had its own depressing influence on his mind, the gloomy pomp of death, the terrible companionship between affliction and worldliness, the tear of the mourner, the heart-broken sigh drowned in the sharp knock of the coffin-maker. He had gone through it all, and sat moodily pondering over the future, when Madame de Sabloukoff entered. "She's much better this morning, and I think we can go over and dine with her to-day," said she, removing her shawl and taking a seat. He gave a little easy smile that seemed assent, but did not speak. "I perceive you have not opened your letters this morning," said she, turning towards the table, littered over with letters and dispatches of every size and shape. "This seems to be from the King. Is that his mode of writing, G.R. in the corner?" "So it is," said Upton, faintly. "Will you be kind enough to read it for me?" "Pavilion, Brighton. Dear Upton, let me be the first to congratulate you on an appointment which it affords me the greatest pleasure to confirm." "What does he allude to?" cried she, stopping suddenly. while a slight tinge of colour showed surprise, and a little displeasure perhaps mingled in her emotions. "I have not the very remotest conception," said Upton, calmly. "Let us see what that large dispatch contains. It comes from the Duke of Agecombe." "Oh," said he, with a great effort to appear as calm and unmoved as possible, "I see what it is. They have given me India." "India!" exclaimed she, in amazement. "I mean, my dear Princess, they have given me the Governor General." "Which of course you would not accept." "Why not, pray?" "India! It's a banishment, barbarism, isolation from all that really interests or embellishes existence, a despotism that is wanting in the only element which gives a despot dignity, that he founds or strengthens a dynasty." "No, no, charming Princess," said he, smiling. "It is a very glorious sovereignty, with unlimited resources and a very handsome stipend." "Which, therefore, you do not decline," said she, with a very peculiar smile. "With your companionship I should call it a paradise," said he. "And without such?" "Such a sacrifice as one must never shrink from at the call of duty," said he, bowing profoundly. The Princess dined that day with the Countess of Glencore, and Sir Horace Upton journeyed toward England. Chapter 54.
of the Fortunes of Glencore. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever. Chapter 54. The End. Tears have gone over, and once more, for it is the last time, we come back to the old castle in the west, beside the estuary of the Killeries. Neglect and ruin have made heavy inroads on it. The battlements of the great tower have fallen. Of the windows, the stormy winds of the Atlantic have only left the stone mullions. The terrace is cumbered with loose stones and fallen masonry. Not a trace of the garden remains, save in the chance presence of some flowering plant or shrub, half choked by weeds, and wearing out a sad existence in uncared-for solitude. The entrance gate is closely barred and fastened, but a low portal in a side wing lies open, entering by which we can view the dreary desolation within. The apartments once inhabited by Lord Glencore are all dismantled and empty. The wind and the rain sweep at will along the vaulted corridors and through the deep arched chambers of the damp, discolored walls and ceilings. Large patches litter the floors with fragments of stucco and carved architraves. One small chamber on the ground floor maintains a habitable aspect. Here a bed and a few articles of furniture, some kitchen utensils, and a little bookshelf are all neatly and orderly arranged, show that someone calls this a home. Sad and lonely enough is it. Not a sound to break the weary stillness, save the deep roar of the heavy sea. Not a living voice, save the wild shrill cry of the osprey, as he soars above the barren cliffs. It is winter, and what desolation can be deeper or gloomier? The sea-sent mists wrap the mountains, and even the Lough itself, in their vapory shroud. The cold, thin rain falls unceasingly. A cheerless, damp, and heavy atmosphere dwells even within doors, and the gray half-light gives a shadowy indistinctness even to objects at hand, disposing the mind to sad and dreary imaginings. In a deep straw chair beside the turf fire sits a very old man, with a large square volume upon his knee. Dwarfed by nature and shrunken by years, there is something of almost goblin resemblance in the bright lustre of his dark eyes, in the rapid motions of his lips as he reads to himself half aloud. The almost wild energy of his features has survived the wear and tear of time, and, old as he is, there is about him a dash of vigor that seems to defy age. Poor Billy Traynor is now upwards of 80, but his faculties are clear, his memory unclouded, and, like Moses, his eye not dimmed. The 3 Chronicles of Loudunor, in which he is reading, is the history of the Glencores, and contains, amongst its family records, many curious predictions and prophecies. The heirs of that ancient house were, from time immemorial, the spot of fortune, enduring vicissitudes without end. No reverses seemed too heavy to rally from, no depth of evil fate too deep for them to extricate themselves. Involved in difficulties innumerable, engaged in plots, conspiracies, luckless undertakings, abortive enterprises, still they contrived to survive all around them, and come out with, indeed, ruined fortunes and beggared estate, but still with life, and with what is next to life itself, an unconquerable energy of character. It was in the encouragement of these gifts that Billy now sought for what cheered the last declining days of his solitary life. His lord, as he ever called him, had been for years and years away in a distant colony, living under another name, dwelling amongst the rough settlers of the wild remote tract. A few brief lines at long intervals were the only tidings that assured Billy he was yet living, yet they were enough to convince him, coupled with the hereditary traits of his house, that some one day or other he would come back again to resume his proud place and the noble name of his ancestors. More than once it had been the fate of the Glencores to see the hearth cold and the roof tree blackened, and Billy now muttered the lines of an old chronicle where such a destiny was now bewailed. Where are the voices whispering low of lovers side by side? And where the haughty dames who swept thy terraces in pride? Where is the wild and joyous mirth that drowned the Atlantic's roar, making the rafters ring again with welcome to Glencore? And where's the step of belted knight that strode the massive floor? And where's the laugh of lady bright we used to hear of yore? The hound that bayed, the prancing steed, impatient at the door, may bide the time for many a year, they'll never see Glencore. And then he came back after all, Lord Hugo, and was taken prisoner at Ormond by Cromwell, and was sentenced to death, said Billy. Sentenced to death, but never shot. Nobody knew why, or will ever know. After years and years of exile he came back, and was at the court of Charles, but never liked, they say, dangerous. That's exactly the word, dangerous. He started up from his reverie, and taking his stick, issued from the room. The mist was beginning to rise, and he took his way towards the shore of the Lough, through the wet and tangled grass. It was a long and toilsome walk for one so old as he, but he went manfully onward, and at last reached the little jetty where the boats from the main line were wont to put in. All was cheerless and leaden-hued over the wide waste of water. A surging swell swept heavily along, but not a sail was to be seen. Far across the Lough he could descry the harbour of Lynne, where the boats were at anchor, and see the lazy smoke as it slowly rose in the thick atmosphere. Seated on a stone at the water's edge, Billy watched long and patiently, his eyes turning at times towards the bleak mountain road, which for miles was visible. At last, with a weary sigh, he arose, and muttering, "He won't come to-day," turned back again to his lonely home. To this hour he lives, and waits the coming of Glencore. The end. End of chapter 54. End of the Fortunes of Glencore by Charles James Lever.